Chapter 1300. Wei Wei by continued. An unloved pervert like you won't understand my blissful life. No trace of snow felt a throbbing pain in his chest. He suppressed it and said through gritted teeth, "A blissful life? Is it possible that your body is tainted with the bliss of poisonous flames?" Wei Wei by smiled charmingly, the corners of her eyes slightly raised. So what if it's tainted with poisonous flames? A man like him looks like a gentleman when he puts on clothes. He's so abstinent that it makes people want to rip off his clothes. The first time I saw him, I wanted to rip off his pure white clothes. No trace of snow, Wei Wei by sighed and pursed her red lips, looking a little wronged. It's a pity that he's too stupid. I've already taken off my clothes, but he still wants me to be his disciple. But a disciple isn't bad either. She laughed softly, her voice like a sigh, tickling his ears. It's more fun to call a disciple and a master in bed. No trace of Snow's fingers trembled, and his breathing became heavier. This was the reason why she liked to call him master in bed so much. No trace of Snow's mouth twitched. "You're actually so shameless." What was going on in her head? Wei Wei by frowned. What's this shameless thing? I've never known this word since I was born. After saying this, she suddenly rolled her eyes and revealed a mischievous smile. She looked him up and down. "Brother, you're always thinking about me. Now you're even trying to sow discord between my master and me. You love me so much that you can't extricate yourself." Shui Wuhan really wanted to laugh coldly and say, "What a fool!" But his chest suddenly hurt, so much so that he couldn't suppress it. His fingers trembled, but he saw that her nails were already moving towards his neck with a cold glint. He clearly didn't teach her much martial arts, only hidden weapons and poison, but she was always able to find the moment when he was distracted and wanted to kill him. No trace of Snow pressed down on her hand expressionlessly and pulled out the needles from her nails. Then he locked her hands behind her back and pressed her against the windowsill. Her long hair just happened to fall to the edge of the rose, like a flower with a hairpin, beautiful and charming. No trace of Snow was dazed for a moment before he suddenly released her. Then he took a few steps back and suddenly disappeared. Wei Wei Bai leaned on the windowsill and scolded him. "Trace, you're a coward. If you have the guts, stick your head out and let me see what kind of person you are. You're even worse than a turtle's egg." No trace of Snow, who hadn't trace of Snow had of Snow had, almost. He took off the mask on his face. His eyes were dark and oppressive. A strange, burning emotion stirred up his calm heart. He took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed it. Of Lu Hu. The system notified that the male lead had gone far away. Wei Wei Bai combed her long hair calmly and removed a few petals from her hair. "That little bastard can't hold it in anymore." The system said, "The male lead is really desperate. Does he want to kill you in advance?" No trace of Snow's heartache, just now, was more frequent than ever before. The higher the favorability, the more intense the arousal. No trace of Snow was almost unable to control himself and was on the verge of going berserk. Wei Wei Bai held her chin expressionlessly and suddenly showed a confident smile. "No, he's here to encourage me to die. After all, I'm such a perfect and beautiful girl, he can't bear to kill me." And read the at https://www.sashu.com/ and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com and read the full article at https://m.sashu.com. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button. Chapter 1301. She emphasized the words perfect, beautiful, and girly. The system sighed. The host's self-praising skills had reached a new level, shameless. He can't bear to part with it, but he wants to live. He can only hope that I'm an ugly person, so he can be determined to kill me. A person wants to destroy a particularly perfect thing. Usually, they can't bear to part with it. But what if that perfect thing has crack? Wei Wei Bai calmly analyzed no trace of Snow's character. She knew that this man's feelings for her had reached his limit. Now, to live, he would think of all ways to kill her. That was why he started to encourage her to become even more depraved. It would be best if she became ugly so that he wouldn't feel bad when he killed her. A scumbag was a scumbag. A scumbag to this extent was simply unique. No trace of snow went to the back of the mountain. He took off his clothes and sat under the cold waterfall until late at night. Only then did he barely suppress the emotional pain in his chest. He went ashore and casually put on a coat. His whole body was cold as he walked forward barefooted. The moonlight was like water. Under the moonlight, his cold face had a cold, killing intent. Unknowingly, he walked to Wei Wei Bai's room. Before they got married, they slept in separate rooms again, because he was worried that he couldn't suppress his feelings for her. No trace of Snow's poisonous fire was only 70 to 80% left. The torture of the poisonous fire could no longer make him frown. What was more difficult to endure now was the pain of love. He had passed the dead knot of the pain of love and no longer had the weakness of the poisonous fire. The martial arts he practiced would reach great success. Since the appearance of this martial arts, he might be the first person to practice it to this extent. He might even be the first and the last person to practice it to great success. No trace of Snow thought of this and suppressed the pain of love. Instead, it was a feeling of excitement. After all, the honor of being the first to succeed was very tempting for men. No trace of Snow looked at the door. He didn't open it. Instead, he turned around to leave. In the end, something was thrown at him lightly. He turned around and saw that it was a flower. He didn't hide. The flower hit him and fell at his feet. No trace of Snow saw a figure lying lazily by the window. She yawned. "Master, where have you been? I've been waiting for you for a long time." She was actually waiting for him? No trace of Snow's eyes darkened, and his smile became gentle. "I have something to do. Why are you still up so late?" Wei Wei Bai smiled. Her eyes were full of charm. "What's the point of sleeping? Thinking of you is the most important thing." No trace of Snow stood in the moonlight and looked at her by the window, smiling brightly at him. It was as if he was the only treasure in her eyes. This was the strong affection that Wei Wei Bai gave him. Even someone as indifferent as him could see how much emotion she had in her eyes. The fake smile on Xue Wuhan's face slowly disappeared. He hid in the dark, afraid that she would see his coldness. Wei Wei Bai yawned again. Then, she stretched out her hand and leaned on the windowsill. Half of her body was exposed. "Master, come here. I have something to tell you." No trace of Snow knew that his situation was not suitable to be too close to her. But he still couldn't help it. As if he was bewitched, he walked in front of her. And Wei Wei Bai's hand grabbed his arm. "Come in the room." No trace of Snow was silent for a while. Then, he exerted force with his feet and jumped into the room as light as a swallow. His bare feet stepped on the cold ground, but his heart was burning with pain. /download. Chapter 1302. Then, she tried to insert her own inner energy and found that the poisonous flames in his body had all disappeared. From now on, he would no longer be troubled by the poisonous flames. But her body had completely collapsed. Even if she did not die for the time being, she would be bedridden. Her body would not be able to hold on for more than a few years before completely collapsing. And before she died, she would have to endure the intense pain and torture of the poisonous flames. He had clearly told her his purpose. How could she still turn herself into a tool for him to use? No trace of Snow had never met such a person. She loved others so desperately. No matter how many women liked him, it was impossible for them to love him as deeply as Wei Wei Bai. The heartache suddenly became sharp. No trace of Snow gritted his teeth and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He suppressed the intense pain and temporarily suppressed the poisonous flames for Wei Wei Bai. Then, he turned around and left. He did not give himself any time to linger. If he continued to be emotional, he would be the one to die. Wei Wei Bai also opened her eyes. Her face was very red, and she had a high fever. How much is the heartbreaking value? The system glanced at the data. 35. Wei Wei Bai turned over. Her body was about to fall apart. This man is really hard to chew. She had already sacrificed herself to this extent. This black-hearted bastard actually only had such a little heartbreaking value. It seemed that the target this time was really hard to conquer. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and thought seriously. What is the key point of the dead knot? She struggled to get up, then dressed and ate. How could she conquer without eating? No trace of Snow seemed to have disappeared. He left a letter saying that he had something to deal with outside. He needed to go out for a while before returning. Wei Wei Bai took advantage of this time to read all the information about No Trace of Snow's martial arts that the system had collected. Because she had the system, she could see a lot of precious secret manuals that others could not see, including No Trace of Snow's family's martial arts secret manuals. It was said that this martial arts technique could make one invincible. However, the side effects were similar to the castration of the Sunflower Manual. In any case, one's body and soul had to be absolutely pure, even more so than a monk. Once they fell in love, they would burn their hearts and die. No Trace of Snow's ancestors had all failed, and no man could escape the fate of infatuation. In the end, he married and had children before dying of love. No Trace of Snow's father had died right in front of him. As for his mother, when she saw that his father was dead, she immediately pulled out her sword and committed suicide. He was so pathetic that he didn't know what to say. It was no wonder that Shui Wuhan was so difficult to win over. After seeing his parents die so tragically, he felt a sense of dread. He was probably traumatized by the idea of falling in love. After reading all the secret martial arts manuals, as well as the research of the various sects on this martial arts, Yang Kai decided to take a look. Wei Wei Bai actually found some clues. Pure Yang versus Absolute Yin. She was born with a pure Yin body, and her blood also contained the power of Yin. This nonsensical setting actually appeared naturally in this wuxiao world. Wei Wei Bai looked at her wrist, then suddenly took a small knife and cut a wound. The poisonous fire was now corroding her internal organs, and she felt very uncomfortable. However, her blood seemed to be fine. She tried to drink a mouthful of her blood and found that the burning pain of her internal organs had indeed reduced by a lot. Wei Wei Bai frowned. My blood, could it be the key to curing No Trace of Snow? The system, congratulations, a clue to the dead knot has appeared. The information of the dead knot has been made public. Some information about the antidote appeared in Wei Wei Bai's mind. Although Wei Wei Bai had read a lot of information and said it with some confidence, she didn't think that she would be able to guess it right. For the S/ for the full articles, for the full articles download, for the full articles T, for the full articles content, comma. Chapter 1303. Her blood couldn't really cure No Trace of Snow, but it could alleviate No Trace of Snow's pain, as long as her blood was purified and given to No Trace of Snow to drink. Then No Trace of Snow wouldn't feel any pain when he was moved. As long as the blood supply continued, he would continue to be fine. But if the blood supply stopped, he would still be in great pain. To put it bluntly, there was no way to completely solve this problem. Bai Wei Wei finally whispered, "Fuck your uncle. You want to play me to death, ah. 3 times the difficulty? Maybe 10 times. The difficulties really came one after another. Wei Wei Bai had just used her blood to make a medicine to suppress No Trace of Snow's heartache. No Trace of Snow, who hadn't returned for many days, suddenly stood outside the window and looked at her gently. She stared at him blankly and revealed a surprised smile. She immediately rushed to the window. "Master, you're back." No Trace of Snow's expression was light and gentle, and his eyes were full of smiles. "Yes, I'm back." Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but pull him, make him lower his head, and give him a kiss on the cheek. "It's good that you're back. Come in and rest. I'll get someone to prepare food for you." After she finished speaking, she hurriedly left the window to call for someone. "Wei Wei," he called out to her. Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned around, her long hair that wasn't tied up fluttering. "What's wrong?" No Trace of Snow looked at her silently for a while, then revealed a smile. "Let's get married." Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Didn't we already say that we were going to get married?" He had already told her that he wanted to marry her. No Trace of Snow looked at her calmly and gently. His eyes were cold, as if there was a layer of gauze between them, giving off an unreal feeling. "No, this is the real deal. We'll get married in 3 days." Wei Wei Bai nervously reached out and twisted her sleeves. Her bold and passionate side had disappeared. Instead, she felt a little helpless and shy. The little girl's cuteness was undeniable. She stamped her foot, and the bells tinkled merrily. You're so casual when you propose. If it weren't for the fact that I like you so much, you would have been chased out of the house. After she finished speaking, she revealed a happy smile. Then, she covered her face with both hands and said shyly, "Okay, I promise you." After saying that, she turned her head again, her eyes bright. "I'll give you a big surprise on the day of our wedding." After saying that, she turned around and ran away happily like a little bird. No trace of Snow, who was standing by the window, silently stared at her back for a long time. Then, he turned around and left. A few Chinese roses fell to the ground. He stepped on them and crushed them without mercy. On the wedding day, Wei Wei Bai was pulled to put on the wedding dress and put on the red veil. She was led forward by someone. There was a lot of noise. It was a grand wedding. She smiled as she held a crystal medicine bottle with both hands. It was a medicine that was successfully made with her blood. "Tongzi, is my family's Henan handsome?" The system trembled. "Henan, you're too immersed in your role." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's just that I haven't worn a red wedding dress in a long time, so I'm a little excited." The system didn't want to remember that every time the host wore a red wedding dress, it didn't end well. She was led to the wedding hall by someone. There were many people's voices. It was the wedding of the Wulin Alliance's leader, and all the decent people were present. Those people suddenly quieted down. It seemed that no trace of Snow had arrived. She couldn't help but lift a corner of the veil. She saw no trace of Snow in a red robe. His handsome face had a hint of coldness. Wei Wei Bai revealed a brilliant smile, her eyes shining brightly. It was as if the person who had come was her only happiness. No trace of Snow slowly walked over. Wei Wei Bai reached out, wanting to hold his hand. From now on, this man would be her life. A long sword pierced through her chest. Wei Wei Bai smiled foolishly. She looked at him, not knowing what had happened. No trace of Snow's face was cold, and there was no trace of emotion in his eyes. His voice also sounded coldly. "Which of the devil sect, you dare to sneak into my side as a spy? Today, I will kill you to support the Wulin Alliance." Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. The sword was in her chest, and blood was gushing out. It was as bright as the red color of the hall. She murmured, "No trace?" No trace of Snow suddenly pulled out the sword. Blood completely spurted out from her chest. She fell to the ground softly. Her eyes were filled with doubt and fear, as if she didn't understand what had happened to her. No trace of Snow lowered his head to look at her. It was as if he was looking at an ant. Then he turned to leave. Wei Wei Bai used the last of her strength to hold on to his trousers. "Master!" Her voice was soft and sweet. "Can you look at me?" No trace of Snow's footsteps stopped abruptly. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. However, he suddenly shook off her hand and strode out. / say button. Chapter 1304. Wei Wei Bai's eyes dimmed. Tears appeared in her eyes and fell to the ground drop by drop. They mixed with the blood and disappeared. The medicine bottle in her hand fell and rolled to the front. Wei Wei Bai's body that could not support itself suddenly reached out with difficulty and crawled forward. No trace of Snow had already taken a step forward. He told himself not to look back. Even if his heart was about to explode, he could not turn back to look at her. He was afraid that he would regret it, but he already had no regrets. Wei Wei Bai was a fatal wound. No one could save her. He heard her crawling forward, the sound of her clothes rubbing against the wet blood. Those tiny sounds gave people a feeling that they were going to die from the pain. His footsteps became slower and slower until he could barely move forward. "Master!" Her voice was so small, filled with grievance and confusion. She seemed to not know why he could kill her so easily. No trace of Snow took a deep breath. He felt that the air was like a knife cutting his body. If he wanted to live, she had to die. It was every man for himself, and he would not fall in love with anyone. If there was, then he would kill her. Wei Wei Bai's hand finally grasped the bottle with difficulty, as if it was her last hope. She was covered in blood. Her snow-white face was stained with blood. Her eyes had lost their usual craftiness. She looked up blankly and fearfully at the back of the red figure walking away. A gentleman like Jade, a handsome tree in the wind. She moved her lips, but no sound came out of them. The guests at the scene clearly came back to their senses. They came to attend a wedding, but it suddenly turned into a funeral. And Wei Wei Bai was actually a spy of the devil sect. Among them, there was a martial artist who had a grudge with the devil sect. He suddenly pulled out his sword and stabbed towards Wei Wei Bai's back. This action was actually a gesture of goodwill to No Trace of Snow. After all, this woman had tricked the Wulin Alliance master. Wouldn't killing her be considered a meritorious service? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with death. She was dressed in red, and her vision was dyed red. The sword was about to pierce her back. She was on the brink of death, giving her a final and painful blow. In the nick of time, the martial artist who attacked her was suddenly kicked away. Along the way, he smashed the tables and chairs. His internal organs were directly shattered. Wei Wei Bai was also pulled into an embrace. The familiar warmth caused her to reveal a trembling smile. "Master, you've come." Her voice was soft and scattered, as if it was her life, about to disappear at any moment. No Trace of Snow was half-squatting and holding her body with one hand. His hand was full of her blood. He lowered his head. His face was terrifyingly pale, but his black eyes were terrifyingly cold. "You can blame me." His voice was calm, but it was trembling slightly. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. The girl's face was dyed red with blood, but her eyes were infatuated and pure, without the usual bold passion. She looked even more weak and slender. Suddenly, she slowly revealed a smile. "How many times can I sleep with you? My life is worth it." No Trace of Snow's pupils shrank. He almost couldn't believe that it had come to this point. Her love was not mixed with a trace of resentment. This was different from what he had imagined. He wanted her to become ugly, wanted her to fall madly because of resentment. Killing her like this, he wouldn't regret it. He couldn't regret it for the rest of his life. Wei Wei Bai held her breath. Her fingers were trembling badly as she handed the bottle in her hand to him. "Teacher, this is for you, I hope. I hope you can. /crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. And next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. Chapter 1305. But there was no trace of love in her eyes, only regret and disgust. He had finally shattered her last bit of hope. He had destroyed all the love she had for him. This was good. She hated him. It was really good. All of his goals had been achieved. From now on, no one in the world could shake his heart. He was emotionless and had no desires. His martial arts were great, and he was invincible. He killed her, but he survived. No Trace of Snow suddenly opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood came out. He coughed a few times, thinking that it was only one mouthful. But then he kept coughing up blood, unable to suppress the pain in his chest. He gritted his teeth and swallowed the blood. Then he picked up Wei Wei Bai's soft body. His handsome face was incomparably pale, like it was carved from jade, without a trace of life. "I've troubled everyone to come here for nothing. Although she is a remnant of the demon sect, she is still my wife. After she dies, she will be added to my family's genealogy and be buried in my Shui family cemetery." The guests looked at each other, but no one dared to object. After all, Shui Wuhan had already killed the man, so the rest of the matter was not a big deal. Shui Wuhan was so rational that he sent the guests away and took care of everything. Only then did he carry Wei Wei Bai's body back to his room. Then, almost uncontrollably, he began coughing up blood again. He thought that by killing her, he would be able to live. He would never be moved by anyone again. But why did she still hate his death when she was already dead? His chest was still in pain, so painful that he didn't know what to do. No Trace of Snow didn't dare think too deeply, because if he thought too deeply, the answer wouldn't be something he could accept. He couldn't regret it. His heartache was only temporary, so he could endure it. Putting her on the bed, he sat there in a daze. It suddenly began to rain outside, pouring down like a torrential rain. No trace of Snow's dull eyes finally moved. He saw the rain splash into the window, splashing onto her face. The thick blood on her face began to melt. Her originally fair and sparkling skin was exposed. No trace of Snow reached out his hand to wipe away the blood on her skin, but when his fingers touched her skin, he suddenly trembled. It was too cold. It was as cold as a corpse. Indeed, she was already a corpse. In the future, she would never wake up again, nor would she open her eyes and call him master. No trace of Snow blankly suppressed the sharp pain in his chest, his hand still holding the crystal bottle in her hand. Suddenly, his hand that was supporting himself on the table seemed to have touched something. No trace of Snow lowered his head and saw that the table was filled with books. They were all profound and ancient secret manuals. Some of them were from the library at home. To gain her trust, he had always pampered her. He told her to walk around and take whatever she wanted. In this ancestral house, there was the accumulated wealth of the Shui clan over the past 100 years, as well as all kinds of martial arts manuals that outsiders could only dream of. He had never been so reassured by anyone before, even if she was the one who made him worry the most. Unstable temperament, temperamental, vicious, and cunning. How could he be so reassured to give the keys to this house to her? Even if it was to gain her trust, he shouldn't give it to her so unreservedly. No trace of Snow was distracted by the pain in his chest. His hand touched the secret manuals and saw that there were notes in her handwriting in the secret manuals. She was really reckless, such precious books. She actually scribbled on them with an ink pen without any scruples. No trace of Snow knew that this was her temperament, reckless and willful. She was just pretending to be obedient in front of him. Chapter 1306. No trace of Snow's eyes fell on those notes, looking over bit by bit until he saw a sentence. Only then did he suddenly look up, the gray color in his eyes bursting with an indescribable distortion. He looked at Wei Wei by lying on the bed. His lips trembled, but he couldn't say a word. His finger was placed on the place where she had written the note. Master, may you love me and never feel heartache again. The bottle in no trace of Snow's hand was her blood. He quickly ran to the bed, reached out, and held her limp fingers. Then he carefully opened her sleeves. There were big and small scars on her white and tender wrists. They were all freshly cut. The wounds were covered with medicine, and some had just been glued together. Some of them were still bleeding before she died. No one had ever been able to solve the deadlock of his martial arts. How many people had spent so many years and so much effort to get past this deadlock? It couldn't even compare to her short period of research. She had used herself as medicine to save him. No trace of Snow stared blankly, his mind in a daze for a moment. He suddenly couldn't take it anymore. There was a sharp pain in his chest like it was splitting open. He didn't even understand why he had clearly killed her, but he still couldn't find peace. The blood at the corner of no trace of Snow's mouth gushed out like a fountain. He choked and coughed, covering his mouth tightly with his hand. The blood splashed on her wrist and fell to the ground along her fingertips. It was as if she was the one who was injured. Shui Wuhan's hands trembled as he tried his best to wipe it off. The more he wiped, the more there was. He couldn't stop the speed of vomiting blood. If this continued, he would definitely die. No trace of Snow was expressionless, but there was a kind of crazy struggle in his eyes. He pinched open the bottle in his hand and poured the medicine inside into his mouth. The medicine was cold and had a bloody taste. He didn't know what was added, but the cold temperature rushed into the depths of his mouth and spread throughout his body. The burning pain in his body, due to his passion, was immediately suppressed. The excruciating pain in his chest immediately subsided. No trace of Snow clutched his chest. His breathing was heavy and messy, and his eyes were still trembling. It was as if she could not believe that she could receive such a tranquil coldness. No trace of Snow lowered his head and wiped the blood off her hands and face. In the end, he realized that he could not finish cleaning her because she was covered in blood. You shouldn't have loved me. No trace of Snow's voice was cold, his expression indifferent. It was as if he didn't care about her death. It was as if the man who was about to die from heartache was not him. No trace of snow recalled the time when he first met her. It was also this kind of rain. She was so timid that she was unusually dull and pale. Then he saw the flowers on her shoulders and the adoration in her eyes. His interest was piqued. Because of his martial arts, he was a cold-hearted person who loved to see others break down. To pass the time of his boring and depressing life, he always liked to find people with pure personalities who had fallen into hell to raise. He gave those people warmth and made them think that they had met their savior. But when they thought that they had obtained the greatest happiness, he once again looked on coldly and ruthlessly pushed them into hell. Wei Wei Bai was the first person with a personality that had nothing to do with being pure. She was like a poisonous flower in the dark, blooming enchantingly, emitting a charming fragrance that lured passers-by to fall. But in front of him, she always looked like a little white flower. She was obedient and lively, and her eyes were full of adoration for him. Chapter 1307. No Trace of Snow thought that if he let her fall into hell, she would definitely look very beautiful when she collapsed. Very beautiful indeed. His hand slowly caressed her dead face, her beautiful white face, her quietly closed eyes. There was also a head of disheveled black hair. She was the first woman that he thought was beautiful. She was so beautiful that anyone would lose their color in front of her. No Trace of Snow thought that she was beautiful all the time. The notes on those secret manuals, word by word, knew that he didn't like her. He just wanted to use her. That was why she humbly wanted to cure him and win his love. She was really stupid. How could one love someone with such an ugly appearance? Even if she was beautiful, it was too embarrassing to love. No Trace of Snow pulled the corner of his mouth, wanting to laugh at her, but he found that his face was a little cold. He reached out and touched it, tears gushing out from his cold eyes. No Trace of Snow looked at the tears on his fingers in shock. His chest didn't hurt anymore, but the tears in his eyes couldn't stop. His hand was still holding her wrist. The wound on her wrist made his fingertips tremble uncontrollably. She was actually afraid of pain. But in her fingernails, to practice the hidden weapon that he wanted her to practice, she inserted needles. On her wrist, to cure him, she used a knife to cut open the flesh one by one. No Trace of Snow suddenly got up. He shook off her hand and closed his eyes, not looking at her anymore. Then he turned and left. He didn't allow himself to continue reminiscing and regretting. She was already dead. He couldn't regret. After walking out, he looked at the empty garden, a red robe swaying past the Chinese roses. The flowers fell to the ground. No Trace of Snow's face was cold, and he raised his foot to step on them. But this time, he couldn't step on them. No Trace of Snow moved his foot, and the Chinese roses appeared on the ground in perfect condition. He looked at them for a while, and suddenly heard someone call him from behind. "Master!" His eyes shone brightly, and he immediately turned to look at the windowsill. However, she found that there was only one Chinese rose tree that was blooming well, but the windowsill was empty. No Trace of Snow stood there blankly for a while. The pain in his chest was gone, but it was empty, so empty that it was terrifying. He laughed coldly at himself. I really fell for it. His self-deprecating laughter gradually grew louder and louder. Finally, his laughter became somewhat twisted and crazy. He laughed until the end, and his expression became somewhat sinister as he coldly said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe that your death can affect me for long. Love is just a temporary infatuation. Only a fool would think about it for a lifetime." When he decided to kill her, there was no turning back. Including the fact that he liked her, he would never admit it. No Trace of Snow looked up at the house. His eyes were filled with madness. He walked over step by step and touched the door. He didn't go in. He just stood at the door like that. His frighteningly pale face had a kind of desperate madness. "I'll kill you and destroy your corpse. Let's see what else you can leave behind to confuse me." Anyone who could make him fall in love with was his mortal enemy. No Trace of Snow asked someone to bring oil and a torch. He personally lit the house. The house burned with a raging fire. No Trace of Snow stood in front of the fire in a red robe. His white face was imprinted with the red light of the fire. He was as handsome as a demon. He didn't have a usual gentleman's mask. His eyes were as cold as ice. He didn't even have the strength to disguise himself. After destroying everything she had, he wouldn't think about it anymore. He was such a cold-hearted person. He wouldn't suffer for a lifetime for something that he could never have, or for someone that he could never have. Chapter 1308. He wouldn't allow himself to be so weak. When the fire started burning, the system looked at the time. Wei Bai needed an hour to revive. There were still 10 minutes before the revival would begin. It thought that by the time the male lead came back from walking around, the time would be up. It could take the opportunity to take the revived host and hide. After all, no trace of Snow's current state saw Wei Bai as a dead end. The higher the favorability, the stronger his desire to kill Wei Bai. In the host plane, there was no such thing as martial arts. And the male lead was at the peak of this plane's martial arts. If he wanted to kill her, she couldn't use any of her intelligence. But she didn't expect the male lead to be so crazy. He didn't go out shopping and came back to burn the house. The system gritted its teeth and cursed. The host's body was gone. How was she going to revive? Not to mention burning it away, even if it was a little disfigured. When the host woke up and found herself ugly, a narcissistic person like her would strangle it to death. For the first time, the system wanted to push the male lead into the toilet to wake him up. The favorability was already above 80. Couldn't it admit it? 80 was already love to the heart. Just a little more than 10 favorability points would be unchanging. And the sadistic value was already 50, so it suddenly increased by 30. Other hosts, if they wanted to abuse someone, they would increase the sadistic value bit by bit. The system world recognized that the sadistic value was one of the hardest values to increase. Because for the male lead, the sadistic value was too painful. Even a little bit of heartache was unbearable, so 30 sadistic value would suddenly increase. The male lead wasn't tortured to death because he was a crazy person. No, he was a strong man. Then, this strong, sick man wanted to burn its host to death. He completely disregarded what such a high favorability level and the sudden increase in heartbreak value meant. The system saw that the flames were about to burn the bed. It hugged its head with a conflicted expression. To save or not to save, it was against the rules. To not save, the mission failed. If it failed, the main system would discover the host's existence and kill it. If it saved the host, it was afraid that it would use up its strength and not have the strength to crawl back to reality. This was a fucking multiple choice question. When the system decided to reach out and take the risk of not being able to return to the real world to save Wei Bai, the door was suddenly kicked open. The system immediately retracted its hand and obediently watched from the side. In the firelight, a red figure appeared in the room. The fire snake licked his red robes, but he didn't seem to feel anything. His scarlet eyes stared at the person on the bed. The flames spread to the top of the bed. A piece of wood fell from the beam and was about to hit the bed. A gust of wind suddenly appeared, sweeping away the wood and extinguishing the flames. No trace of Snow's long hair was disheveled, and his body was in a mess. He staggered to the bedside. Then he reached out and picked up Wei Bai. Because of the heat from the fire, her face was actually a little red. His body was warm now. It was as if she was still alive and sleeping in his arms. No trace of Snow carried her out expressionlessly. The fire snake burned his feet, but he didn't feel anything. The whole room was filled with fallen wood chips and flames. He raised his hand and blocked these. Not a single trace fell on Wei Bai's body. After walking out, there was a group of frightened servants who were putting out the fire outside. Seeing no trace of Snow walk in, these people were afraid that he would die for love, so they immediately started to put out the fire. Chapter 1309. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come to search book www.sashu.com in Baidu to find the S. When no trace of Snow carried her out, a group of people rushed forward, wanting to see if he was okay. But they were suddenly pushed aside by an extremely strong force. The group of people rolled on the ground, letting out miserable howls. No trace of Snow's eyes were cold and empty, not looking at anyone. His hands held onto Wei Bai tightly, his expression calm, but with a frightening madness. His back was facing the firelight. His face was taut with a bright red hue, and it actually carried the sinister coldness of being possessed by the devil. The system's mouth twitched, not knowing what the male lead was up to. No trace of Snow carried her, walking forward step by step. The bells on her ankles jingled, sounding exceptionally pleasing to the ears. No trace of Snow's breathing became chaotic following the jingling of her bells. He came to his family's cemetery. Then, as if he had lost all his strength, he sat down in front of an empty grave. The sword at no trace of Snow's waist fell to the ground, the blade in the scabbard still stained with her blood. The man's expression was cold, his long hair fell to the ground, and his clothes were burned by the fire, making him look even more pitiful. He carried Wei Wei by, sat for a while, then put her down in the flower field. She was dressed in a bloody wedding dress. Her face was calm, without the usual noise, gentle and exquisite. No trace of Snow reached out and stroked her long hair, then turned around and began to dig the soil with his bare hands. After digging the hole, he found that he didn't prepare a coffin. No trace of Snow looked at the hole blankly. She definitely wouldn't like it if there was no coffin. After all, there were many insects in the soil, and she was also afraid of getting dirty. No trace of Snow looked at her for a while, not knowing what to think, then got up to look for a coffin. When the flames started to burn, he found that he regretted it. He never regretted anything he did, and he didn't allow the feeling of regret to appear. Going into the flames to bring her body out was the first time he regretted it. No trace of Snow left with heavy footsteps, but when he returned, he saw that there was nothing among the flowers. Only the bloodstains on her body remained. The coffin on no trace of Snow's shoulder fell to the ground with a loud crash. He quickly rushed to the side of the flower bushes and reached out his hand to push the flowers aside with all his might. No, she was gone. No trace of Snow's breathing became heavy. His eyes were red, and he could no longer control his expression. His calm was shattered. Wei Wei. She was gone. How could the corpse be gone? Who took it away? No trace of Snow's fingers trembled as he gripped the red flower patch. A heart-wrenching pain finally broke through his hypocritical disguise. He let out a low, mournful roar. He realized that he actually regretted it. The moment she died, he started to regret it. What did he mean by bringing her out of the fire was the first time he regretted it. He couldn't even fool himself with this kind of nonsense. When he pulled out his sword and pierced through her chest, he knew that he had done something wrong. It was something that he would never be able to forgive himself for. But he didn't dare to think about it. He didn't dare to touch it. He forced himself to hold on until now. And the disappearance of Bai Weiwei's body was the final fatal blow to him. It completely crushed him. On a tree not far from the cemetery, Wei Wei Bai slowly opened her eyes. Tongzi, I'm alive. The system said yes. Does your body still hurt? Wei Wei Bai said, I'm fine. Where's no trace of Snow? The system glanced at her. He's digging for you everywhere. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her fingers. Her fingertips were covered in blood. She looked at the wound on her wrist and sneered. I won't leave until I torture this bastard to death. I won't leave until my torment points reach 100. Torment points, this thing could leave the plane even if it wasn't full. But Wei Wei Bai decided to max it out, because she had never seen such an infuriating scumbag fighter. // to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click save below to record this reading record. Chapter 13:10. A man could be so heartless and shameless. Wei Wei Bai thought that was fine. However, no trace of Snow was not heartless anymore. He wanted to disfigure her face. Don't think that she would not know that he wanted to cremate her after she died. She thought about how she would look when she woke up after being burnt to a crisp. She would look like a mummy. How could she look at that? Bai Weiwei's teeth itched with hatred. Just a little bit more, just a little bit more, my face would be gone. And my hand, look at this hideous centipede wound, this twisted scar. My perfect skin can't be restored. The system was silent. It asked, is that why you want to torture him? Wei Wei Bai was confused. What else? The system said, he stabbed you. Wei Wei Bai said, yeah, there's a scar on my chest too. My skin is even uglier now. The system was speechless. Wei Wei Bai felt that the system's mood was not right. What's wrong? The system said, nothing. I just wanted to tell you that you're still beautiful. Wei Wei Bai was relieved. Your eyes are finally back to normal. I've always been like this. The system was speechless. Why would it worry about its host being tortured? It had fucking forgotten that it had blocked her feelings. How could she feel the torture? The system wiped its snot silently. That was why it cried so much when it saw the wedding torture. Was it the only one that was being tortured? Wei Wei Bai thought for a while. But there's a way to torture. No trace of snow is too rational and strong. So to torture him, the system was all ears. What do you need? Wei Wei Bai said, I need to be more rational than him. That's not a problem. I'm more rational than him. So I need to be stronger than him. The system thought, why do you have to say this nonsense? It's all nonsense. Wei Wei Bai said, that's why I need to do that. The system didn't say anything and just lay there, pretending to be dead. Wei Wei Bai, do you have the best kung fu in the world? Give it to me as a gift. The system turned over and continued to lie down. Wei Wei Bai, why don't you give me an extremely handsome army so that I can crush no trace of snow? The system was lying on its stomach with its face on the ground. The ants on the ground were truly beautiful. Wei Wei Bai was enraged. You useless system. Why don't you have anything? You're poor and useless. The system was enraged as well. It shed tears of poverty. I'm useless. I'm poor, but I'm handsome. You can't despise me. Wei Wei Bai, I can't see your handsome face, so what's the use? Apart from the sound, when had she ever seen it? Her voice was quite pleasant to the ears. The system said, I'll show it to myself. Once I'm in a good mood, I'll be able to work properly. Otherwise, I'll be depressed if I have to look at you every day. Wei Wei Bai looked disgusted. You dare despise me? The system looked disgusted as well. Other than your beauty, which part of you doesn't make people despise you? Wei Wei Bai, then her mood improved. Although it's the truth, I'm still embarrassed when you say that every day. System, exploding survival, explosion system, Then it silently took out the demon sect medal. This thing was lying in the garbage dump, and no one knew what it could do. Who knew it would come in handy in this world? As the name suggested, the demon sect medal could be used to establish a demon sect. Just like in a game, with this thing, all the conditions to establish a demon sect would be met automatically. However, the demon sect had a time limit. It would automatically disband after 3 months. Transmigration system. My Prince Charming, come here, /transmigration system. My Prince Charming, come here, / transmigration system. My Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system. My Prince Charming, come here. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save next time you open the bookshelf. You'll be able to see it. If you like Transmigration system, My Prince Charming, come here, comma. Chapter 1311. This kind of thing was completely useless. That was why it had been thrown into the trash for hundreds of years. Unexpectedly, it was so poor that it even dug out something from hundreds of years ago. It was so poor that it moved the heavens and the earth. Then it silently handed over the demon sect medal. Recently, the supermarket gave out a big discount. Because we were discount members, we also gave you one. Take it. Wei Wei Bai took it and nodded. Finally, you gave me something that I can see. Your supermarket in the system world is not bad. The system touched its nose and faintly hummed in agreement. It took it as a compliment. The demon sect was once again established. With unstoppable power, it overturned the peace of the entire Jianghu. All kinds of demons and ghosts, terrifying characters that had never appeared before, joined the demon sect one after another, as if they were possessed. The demon sect saintess was also the sect leader. It was as if she had the ability to charm people. Those who joined the demon sect were all extremely loyal. The saintess said that the demon sect began to massacre the Jianghu righteous sections. Kill no trace of snow, and let this Jianghu have no leader, no hypocritical and disgusting Jianghu righteous sections. The demon sect had an absolute advantage and was crazily crushing them. On the other hand, the righteous sects were gloomy. Because the pillar of the Jianghu righteous sects, No Trace of Snow, had not appeared for a while. Ever since the demon sect spy was killed by him at the wedding, their leader started to feel strange. It was just that he was not a big leader and semi-retired, disappearing from time to time. Even if they wanted to find him, they could not find him. The demon sect wantonly attacked. They even hung a righteous person outside No Trace of Snow's house and stripped him naked with the words "coward" come out quickly written on it. This was simply a great humiliation. But No Trace of Snow still did not appear, until a red ribbon appeared. The ribbon was bright red and was tied to the door knocker. No Trace of Snow's loyal servant saw it and frowned. He hesitated for a while before untying the ribbon. Then he carefully carried it and walked to the deepest part of the old house. There was a pool of ice water underground. It was refined from 1,000-year-old ice and was built by a certain generation of the Schweff family with all their wealth. He had originally planned to suppress the pain of the pure yang body, but he didn't expect the icy pond to be so cold. Even a pure yang body could not withstand it. If an ordinary person fell into the pool, they would freeze to death. As for those with pure yang bodies, they would not be able to hold on for long before the cold poison seeped into their bones. If too much time passed, the body would not be able to hold on and might collapse. Therefore, this pool had been sealed underground for a long time, and no one would use it. The servant carefully walked down. The chill had already made him shiver all over. In the cold white mist, he finally saw a tall and slender figure lying by the side of the pool. His long white hair glowed with a lustrous luster as it draped over the cold water. Her delicate side profile was like the most beautiful jade. Her flawless skin was so white that she didn't seem human. No Trace of Snow heard the footsteps and lazily raised his head. His eyes were incomparably cold and lifeless. The servant knelt down, his whole body trembling. "Young master, I recognize this ribbon. It was used to tie the hair of the madam at the wedding." No Trace of Snow's originally lifeless eyes lit up in an instant. His black eyes seemed to ignite with a trace of vitality, causing his cold face to fluctuate violently. With a splash, he directly stepped out of the ice pool, pulled on his outer robe, and then took the ribbon from the servant's hand. No Trace of Snow's white hair fell behind him. He was barefooted, and his hand tightly gripped the red ribbon. Chapter 13:12. The familiar pain in his chest began to appear. The medicine she gave him only suppressed his pain for a short time. She had always been smart. If she knew that she was a drug, he would always dote on her. So she would rather be his drug for the rest of her life. She was also unwilling to study the antidote that could heal him, but she didn't know that he would kill her. No Trace of Snow couldn't find Wei Wei Bai's body. After the effects of the medicine passed, his body began to collapse. This kind of pain in his chest. It made him clearly realize that even if she died, he still couldn't live. So he could only enter the ice pool and be eroded by the cold poison to suppress the pain in his chest. His hair also turned white because of the cold poison in the ice pool. No Trace of Snow's extremely pale face showed murderous intent. "Whoever stole her, I will cut that person up piece by piece." He looked at the ribbon. It was a bright red. He could vaguely remember the red ribbon fluttering when she tied her hair into two buns. Xue Wuhan's lips slowly curled into a smile. However, this smile froze. All the feelings she once gave him were so beautiful. How cruel it was now. No Trace of Snow lowered his eyes. His pale face and purple lips trembled. He lowered his head and kissed her hair ribbon. "I will bring you back, even if... I know you don't want to see me." She was dead, but she trapped him. No Trace of Snow knew that his days were numbered. In the past, he thought that as long as he killed the person he loved, he would be able to live. But he didn't expect that after she died, his heart couldn't lie. The feelings that had been moved couldn't be taken back. No Trace of Snow walked forward slowly. His snow-white hair floated with a cold mist. He casually tied the red hairband around his white hair. His entire body was white, except for the headband on his head. It was so red that it looked like fresh blood. No Trace of Snow put on his crescent moon-colored robe and went out with his sword. The hairband was attached to the door knocker, and outside the door knocker was a member of the pugilistic world. No trace of Snow seemed to be oblivious to such humiliation, but when it passed by the naked man, the rope suddenly broke, falling from above. No trace of Snow looked straight ahead and walked over. The person who delivered the tape also gave him an address at the same time. The address was at the top of a mountain, surrounded by forests. It was very suitable for an ambush. The person who invited him probably wanted him dead. No trace of Snow did not have any emotional fluctuations. He only knew the person who sent the invitation. There was Wei Bai's corpse. Otherwise, this hairband wouldn't have appeared on the doorknob. The demonic sect was flourishing again. It seemed that they were going to kill him, the Wulin Alliance leader, to demonstrate their power. Shui Wuhan sneered. He stroked his sword. It seemed that he would be able to kill again today. On the top of the mountain, no trace of Snow was dressed in white. He saw a group of people from the demonic sect surrounding him. Without any surprise, he said coldly, "Who is your holy maiden?" Wei Bai's corpse should be in the hands of the so-called Holy Maiden. Holy Maiden, if the demonic sect had not been destroyed once. Wei should also be the successor of the Holy Maiden. Shui Wuhan felt a sharp pain in his chest. He suppressed the pain of his blood and qi surging. A few strands of his silver hair fell to the side of his face. His handsome face had a kind of beauty that made people admire him. But there was only death and madness in his eyes. The people from the demonic sect were extremely loyal to the current Holy Maiden, as if they were poisoned. Without saying anything, they rushed up to kill him. No trace of Snow saw a pink palanquin in the distance. The palanquin was shrouded in a thin veil, and a beautiful figure could be vaguely seen inside. For convenience next time, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 13:13. He felt that the figure seemed somewhat familiar, but he also felt that he had been possessed. How could he find a strange figure familiar? No trace of Snow walked step by step towards a sedan chair. The people of the Devil's sect surrounded him. Protect the Saintess. No trace of Snow did not say a word. He pulled out his sword, and a white light flashed. The people in the front row who blocked him were all killed with one slash to the throat. But the people of the Devil's sect seemed to have no souls and were not afraid of death at all. They rushed over one after another. They were dead and maimed. The thick smell of blood on the mountain top was nauseating. No trace of Snow's white clothes were stained with blood. He was indifferent and wiped his sword with someone else's clothes. His silver hair fell behind his back. His face was as white as his hair, so white that it was almost sickly. He walked over slowly. He could not wipe the sword clean in his hand. Blood dripped down from the tip of the sword. "Return my wife to me." No trace of Snow said softly, but it was clearly transmitted to the sedan chair. The person in the sedan chair seemed to have heard something funny and could not help but laugh. The laughter was like a silver bell that moved people. No trace of Snow suddenly stopped in his tracks. His eyes trembled in fear. He could not believe it. Was this an illusion? The figure in the sedan chair suddenly disappeared. No trace of Snow felt a sharp pain in his heart and immediately leaped over. He smashed the sedan chair with a punch. There was no one inside. His sharp ears heard the sound of a bell. This bell sound was Wei. No trace of Snow held his sword and looked around blankly, afraid that he had heard wrongly. His lips trembled. He finally could not help but say, "Wei, did you come back to see me?" He thought that her soul had returned. She hated him so much that she would not be willing to come back to see him after she died. So during this period of time, she did not enter his dreams. No trace of Snow did not hear an answer, but he heard the bell sound disappear into the forest. His face turned cold. It was not an illusion. It was real. It seemed that the Saintess really had her ways. She was able to bewitch people and create illusions. Was this the reason why she could make the demon cult flourish again? No trace of Snow's expression finally cracked. His handsome face was full of killing intent, and an icy darkness surged into his eyes. No one could pretend to be her. He would not allow it. No trace of Snow walked into the forest. Suddenly, several masters of the devil cult jumped down from the trees. "Hand over your life." No trace of Snow didn't even lift his eyes. His sword swept out in an arc, and several experts collapsed to the ground. It was still a single slash to the throat. It didn't matter if he was an expert or a rookie. Whether it was sinister or open, it was fine. Everyone who attacked him had their throats slit. His martial arts were so high that it made people tremble in fear. It was not the martial arts that a human should have. The ringing continued. No trace of Snow's eyelashes trembled, but his eyes were as cold as ice beads. He clenched his long sword, and with a strong, killing intent, he walked into the depths of the forest. Then he saw a beautiful tree. On the thick branches, a beautiful red gauze hung down. Between the gaps of the green leaves, he could vaguely see a slender and beautiful figure. Her black hair was casually scattered. Under the red dress, a pair of bare and delicate feet hung down from the tree trunk. A silver bell ring hung on one of her ankles. Her back was to him, humming a little tune. Her voice was soft and sweet. It was like soft smoke, but also like mist in the water. No trace of Snow's footsteps slowed down. He stared blankly. Even if it was just a back view, he could recognize it. But he was afraid that it was his dream. He called softly, "Wei Wei Bai." The figure seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then she turned her head, revealing that familiar and beautiful face. Wei Wei Bai revealed a brilliant smile. "Master, you're here." No trace of Snow's chest hurt, but he was willing to endure it. He did not suppress it at all. He walked over unsteadily. She sat on the tree trunk. He reached out to pull her down, but in a hurry, he grabbed her ankle. That silver bell was cold. It woke him up with a start. Then he was wild with joy. It was real. It was not a dream, nor was an illusion. It was Wei Wei Bai in the flesh. No trace of Snow's eyes reddened. He was so excited that tears almost came out. He was so excited that he reached out and held her ankle. His face was close to it, and he felt the familiar temperature of her body. It was warm. It was the temperature of a human, and not a corpse. Wei Wei Bai pulled back her leg, strangely. Her eyes were gentle. "Master, what's wrong? We haven't seen each other for a few days. Why are you so excited?" No trace of Snow had a lot of words stuck in his mouth. He was so excited that he did not know what to say. Wei Wei Bai had already jumped down from the tree and approached him with an affectionate and cute smile. She reached out and put her hands on his shoulders. She tiptoed and approached him with her face. Her warm and sweet breath surrounded him. "Master, are you very happy to see me?" No trace of Snow's breath stopped. He could not control himself and approached her. He reached out and grabbed her waist, wanting to completely imprison her in his arms. But in the next moment, he felt a chill on his chest. A short blade pierced his chest. Wei Wei Bai was still smiling gently and sweetly. She said softly, "Master, I'm very happy to see your disciple. Is the feeling of a sharp blade piercing your heart delicious?" Slash. Chapter 13-14. No trace of Snow was slightly stunned. His chest was bleeding, but he did not seem to feel any pain. Wei Wei Bai's smile was so clear and beautiful. Her face was no longer as pale as a corpse's, but was full of blood. He took a step forward, and the tip of the knife went deeper. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled. He felt this hesitant tremble, and without any hesitation, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her into his embrace. He did not care if the knife could kill her. To him, that little bit of warmth on her wrist was his salvation. Unfortunately, Wei Wei Bai turned her wrist, trying to break free from his grasp. Xue Wuhan's eyes were fixed on her. He didn't care about her struggle at all. His silver hair was a little messy, and his lips parted slightly. "Wei Wei, you're back." He was still afraid that this was a dream. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were cold, but her smile did not change. "I'm back to kill you." No trace of Snow's chest was in pain, but it was not because of the wound, but because he was aroused. Falling in love was a deadly poison to him. No trace of Snow's brows relaxed. His lips curved upwards, and his eyes and mouth were full of gentleness. It was no longer a hypocritical, fake gentleness. It was a gentleness from the bottom of his heart that could not be suppressed. This man was so handsome at this moment that he was practically glowing. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were confused for a moment. She stepped back, wanting to break away from him. But in the next moment, she was suddenly held back. No trace of snow had already grabbed her tightly and lowered his head to kiss her lips. This kiss was unrestrained and extremely crazy. It broke into her lips, bringing with it the taste of blood and a desperate attack power. Her breath, familiar fragrance, the bell on her ankle, and familiar voice. It made his lifeless life burst out with an indescribable light. So what if he died? She wanted his life. He would give it to her. It didn't matter how she came back to life or why she came back. Most importantly, she was back. Even if she was here to kill him, he would gladly do so. He was wrong from the very beginning. He was wrong because he thought that death could take away the poison of love. But death was a terrifying abyss. If she died, he would never be free. No trace of Snow's tears fell from the corner of his eyes. He hugged her tightly and felt the sound of the knife in her hand piercing through his ribs and into his internal organs. A master of the devil cult seemed to be waiting to ambush him. Seeing that he had exposed his back and was hugging Wei Wei Bai, that black shadow suddenly appeared and ruthlessly chopped down on his back with a poisonous cold blade. But before the knife could fall on No Trace of Snow's back, No Trace of Snow didn't even turn around. He didn't move his eyes away. He suddenly made his move, pulling out his sword with one hand and swinging it behind him. Like a flying knife, the long sword pierced through the attacker's heart. Ruthless and swift, not giving anyone a chance to survive. He himself was seriously injured, but he was still an unshakable existence. Wei Wei Bai's pupils constricted. All the people she had ambushed were killed by No Trace of Snow. She wanted to break free from his embrace, but he didn't give up and invaded her. This kiss was full of blood and endless entanglement. She bit the tip of his tongue until it bled. Because the sharp knife in his chest was stuck in his ribs, she couldn't go any deeper. She still didn't have any internal strength, so her strength was similar to that of an ordinary person. Even if he stood still, she wouldn't be able to kill him even if she stabbed him in the chest with the knife. She was pressed against the tree trunk by him. The blood on his chest all stained her dress. Wei Wei Bai couldn't break free. She fiercely pulled out the knife in her hand. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 13:15. This time, the blood gushed out even more fiercely. No Trace of Snow chuckled, finally letting go of her lips. His forehead was pressed against hers. His lips were stained with blood from her bite, and his eyes were shining brightly. "This taste is so delicious," he said softly, his voice magnetic and seductive. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, her eyes filled with all kinds of complicated emotions. There was hatred, love, and pain. She moved her lips as if she wanted to say something, but all her words turned into a choked and sorrowful sigh. "No Trace of Snow, I hate you." No Trace of Snow's mouth was stained with blood, which kept dripping down from his chest. He casually raised his hand, gently touching her delicate face, his eyes greedy and warm. "I know, you can continue to hate me." He didn't care, as long as she was alive and still had him in her heart. He didn't care about anything. Even if it was hate born from love. Wei Wei Bai leaned against the tree trunk, looking at him indifferently. She suddenly slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me, hypocrite." No Trace of Snow grabbed her wrist nervously. The word, like, in his mouth was filled with the taste of blood. But he couldn't say it. He didn't have much time left. The cold poison in his body, the pain of love, these were all punishments to torture him. None of the men of the Shui family who had fallen in love could escape the path of death. No Trace of Snow denied it again. When Wei Wei Bai died, he clearly saw his own path to death. And Wei Wei, by coming back to life, sped up his death. The pain in his chest made him feel comfortable and happy. This was the pain of his feelings deepening, but it was also the gratitude of seeing her alive. The corners of Bai Weiwei's long and narrow eyes rose, and there was a trace of cold mockery in them. "Seeing that I'm alive, do you want to kill me again? After all, I'm just a witch from a demonic sect." No Trace of Snow's expression was tense. His handsome face had a kind of frozen calmness. Only his eyes were filled with tenderness, but there was also a kind of grief. "I can't kill you, Wei Wei. Killing her it would be the biggest mistake of his life. The indifference and ridicule in Bai Weiwei's eyes deepened. She suddenly smiled, stretched out a finger, and gently touched the corner of his lips. Master, you can't kill me. Could it be that you've fallen in love with me? No trace of Snow's eyes. He stared at her, silent for a while, then said, Of Snow of you came back to take revenge? Bai Weiwei withdrew her finger. Seeing the blood on it, she wiped it on his clothes in disgust. For some reason, his attitude actually carried a trace of familiarity and intimacy. This intimacy made no trace of Snow's heart tremble. Then he heard her cold and stifled voice. I'm going to kill you. No trace of Snow's expression didn't change at all. His hands suddenly dropped, raised his neck, and exposed his weak Adam's apple. The man's appearance at this moment actually had a fragile sex appeal. It's right for you to kill me. I'll pay you back with my life. Weiwei Bai looked up at him, the cold ridicule and indifference in her eyes finally breaking. Her voice trembled. No trace of Snow, what do you mean? No trace of Snow's gentle expression didn't change. His lips were full of blood, and more blood gushed out from his chest. He could use his internal energy to suppress the injury, but he didn't. He even deliberately opened the wound, making it more serious. He smiled like a spring breeze. I don't mean anything. I just want to make you happy. After all, you're my wife. It's my responsibility to make you happy. // Chapter 13:16. Weiwei Bai couldn't hold back the smile on her face anymore. Her voice became sharp. Wife. Is there a wife who was killed by her husband on the first day of the wedding ceremony? She finally couldn't keep calm. She grabbed his collar with both hands, and the pain and hatred in her eyes finally appeared. No trace of Snow. You ruined everything for me. Do you know how much I hate you? No trace of Snow lowered his eyes. His expression was a little sluggish. He wanted to redeem himself, but he didn't know how to do so. In fact, he was also a loss. He saw tears in her eyes and saw her trembling in pain that she couldn't suppress. Heartache suddenly hit him. This kind of pain wasn't the pain of a wound, nor was it the pain of emotional torture. It was another kind of pain that was softer but more unbearable. No trace of Snow pursed his lips and said in a hoarse voice, Weiwei. Weiwei Bai shouted angrily. Enough, you don't have the right to call my name. Since you sent yourself to me, I won't be polite. She pulled out all the knives and watched as blood gushed out of his chest. Her lips trembled, her fingers trembled, and even her breathing was chaotic. Weiwei Bai raised her hand, and the hand that was holding the knives tightened and loosened. Tears suddenly gushed out of her eyes, and she said each word like crying blood. No trace of Snow. Why did I have to meet you? I can't even kill you. Why do I have to be so lowly to a man who doesn't love me? She cried with grievance and sadness. She was clearly holding the knives and had the upper hand, but she was even more fragile than No Trace of Snow, who was seriously injured. No Trace of Snow's heart didn't know what to do with her crying, but her reluctance made his eyes light up. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. His breath blew into her ear. The smell of blood and the man's voice were equally cold, but with a heavy sense of surrender. Weiwei, I love you. These words carried more weight than anyone else. This was because the martial arts he practiced did not allow him to be emotionally moved. Once he was moved, he would die. Therefore, once a man said that he loved a woman, it would be the end of the road. That was why he rejected the idea of falling in love with someone, because this was a declaration of his death. But today, he was willing to say it just to soothe her tears. After he said it, he actually felt relieved. He couldn't help but repeat, I really love you. This sentence was actually sweet, with the sweetness of blood. Bai Weiwei didn't move. She was sluggish for a while. You love me? No Trace of Snow. Yeah. Weiwei Bai still couldn't believe it. Do you really love me? He was like an insecure child who wanted others to repeat this beautiful vow again and again. No Trace of Snow reached out and gently stroked her ink-black hair. I've never loved a woman so much before. You're the first and the last. Weiwei Bai leaned her head on his hard shoulder. Her voice softened. Do you love me? Do you love me so much that you die for me? No Trace of Snow almost didn't hesitate. Yes. Wei Bai. Can you give up the position of the alliance leader and grovel at my feet? No trace of snow. Yes. He wanted her to be happy. He wanted her to love him like before. He also wanted her to be lively and happy, and not to be hurt by him to the point where she was now. Weak, insecure, and in pain. Wei Bai suddenly grabbed the clothes on his back. Her voice was choked with sobs. No trace of snow. Master. The title Master was sad and helpless. The save button. Chapter 13:17. She muttered, "How could you kill me? I've loved you since the first time I saw you. Even if you killed my entire family, I still can't let go of my love for you. I want to kill you because I want to steal your attention. I'm a cheap person." No trace of Snow's heart let down his guard because of her words. She still loved him. He had never been keenly aware of her love. No trace of Snow's heart actually felt a sense of joy, because even at this point, she still loved him. Wei Bai suddenly let go of his clothes and escaped from his embrace. Her face was filled with tears as she looked at him with a pale face. "You say you love me, but I don't believe you." No trace of Snow stared at her, his expression still indifferent. He said softly, "What do you want me to do for you to believe me?" Wei Bai's face was filled with tears, but she revealed a charming smile that was suffused with a dark, evil intent. It was like a poisonous flower in the dark night, blooming with an alluring fragrance. "I want you to be betrayed by everyone." Her words were vicious, and she gritted her teeth. "You ruined everything for me, so I want you to ruin everything for yourself. You turned against the righteous path and destroyed your own family. Everyone wants to beat you up. A hypocrite like you doesn't deserve to live so openly." No trace of Snow looked at her calmly. "That's all." Wei Bai clenched her hands and finally couldn't help but shout angrily. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to have no way to turn back and never betray me again." This was her, naked and gorgeous. Her possessiveness was like a poison, without any gentleness or warmth. It was an ice-cold plunder, but no trace of Snow smiled. His smile was relaxed and beautiful. He nodded. "All right, if that's all you want, I can give it to you." She wanted all of this, which made him even more certain. She loved him to the bone. After he finished speaking, his movements were extremely swift. He came in front of her and took advantage of her unpreparedness to suck on her lips and give her a deep kiss. Before Wei Bai could react, he had already turned around and left. He casually pulled out his sword from the corpse that had attacked him just now. His silhouette floated like an immortal, his silver hair falling to his waist. The blood dripped to the bottom of his robes, but he seemed to feel no pain. Wei Bai covered her mouth and stared at him blankly. The system looked at this, and then that. It had no idea what the host was doing. Heartbreaking value increased by 5. The system said. Her favorable impression of him increased by 5 points. 55 points of heartbreak and 85 points of favorability. This basically didn't torture No Trace of Snow. It was more like a reward for him. Bai Weiwei watched as Shui Wuhan walked away. Her sad and hateful expression disappeared, and she wiped her tears. "It's okay. This is just a foreshadowing. Let me take a break and adjust my acting rhythm before I torture him." Stabbing someone with a knife was nothing more than tormenting the body. There was no point in tormenting the heart. That was why tormenting the heart was the key. Wei Bai said to the system, "Doesn't this demonic sect metal have a function? It can make 3 to 7 martial arts masters completely hypnotize them to listen to me." The system said, "Yes, but the effect won't last long. It can only last for a month. After a month, they will know what you did and will probably kill you." Wei Bai said, "It's okay. We'll talk about it after a month. You can hypnotize a few handsome guys." The system, "What?" Wei Bai said, "Hypnotize a harem for me." The system, "What?" After No Trace of Snow finished killing, he wiped his sword expressionlessly and walked out. Another righteous sect was annihilated. More than 100 people, but none of them had a complete corpse. The Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. / the Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. / Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. The transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 13:18. He was still dressed in white, his eyes cold and his posture elegant. When he walked out, he saw that it was raining outside. He opened a bamboo umbrella. His white, jade-like fingers gripped the slightly green handle of the umbrella. He stood under the umbrella and looked at the people outside the door with an indifferent expression. They were all experts. This should be all the combat power that the righteous faction could bring out. No trace of Snow looked at them silently, his eyes calm, as if he was looking at a stone by the roadside. Or a dead person. His chest did not hurt, and he still had the medicine bottle that Wei Wei Bai had given him hidden in his sleeve. The medicine made with her blood had become his lifesaver. But to no trace of Snow, he was not happy because this medicine could save him. It was because she gave it to him. She still had him in her heart. In the past, he was the Wuling Alliance leader because this position could only be obtained by defeating everyone. But after being the Alliance leader, he felt that it was very boring. That was why he became the White Magnolia, whether it was the righteous or the villain. Killing people was fine, but saving people made people feel despair. This kind of thing was very easy for him. It was enough for him to be able to enjoy it. So Wei Wei Bai wanted him to be isolated and despised by everyone. She thought that he would be afraid of this, but she did not know that he was not close to her. His only family and lover now was her. As for the disdain of others, they were just ants, sand, and stones. He had never cared about them. No trace of Snow, you are crazy. How can you kill so many people? When he killed people, he did not hide it. He even left people alive to call for help. It was as if he deliberately let people know about his crimes. No one believed that No Trace of Snow would do such a thing. He was No Trace of Snow. He was the last conscience of the Wuling Alliance, the most impartial law enforcer. He was also the most powerful expert of the righteous faction. How could he be crazy just like that? No Trace of Snow slowly walked out. The rain hit the umbrella, and his delicate features had a soul-stirring charm under the dark sky. He was still that elegant gentleman. Only the hem of his snow-white robe was stained with a few traces of blood. He was as elegant as the red plum blossoms dyed in snow. He smiled gently. I killed people today because I wanted to tell you that I'm going to join the demonic sect. The experts who had rushed over from all directions were dumbfounded. Now, he was even more confused. The devil sect? Join the demonic sect? The leader of the Wuling Alliance had joined the demon sect. What the hell was that? The Alliance Master was basically the benchmark of the righteous faction, the leader of the righteous faction. The fact that their leader was going to betray them and join the enemy was a huge blow to the experts from the various sections. No Trace of Snow saw the shock on their faces and indifferently swept his sleeves with his finger. What? Aren't you going to congratulate me? Everyone was shocked by his unusual attitude and didn't know what to do. This was even more comical than a nightmare. Anyone could join the demon sect. So how could it be No Trace of Snow? There was no warning at all. Could it be? Some people thought of the disturbing rumors about the saintess of the demon sect. That demoness seemed to be able to control people's hearts. Otherwise, there were so many terrifying and vicious martial arts experts. Many of them were lone wolves, and some were even semi-retired. They all came back to the Jianghu for that demoness and were willing to be controlled by her. What was this if not witchcraft? A middle-aged expert angrily rebuked. Chief, are you being controlled? Did that demoness of the demon sect put a goo in you? Many people echoed his words. Otherwise, there was no reason for No Trace of Snow to change his mind. No Trace of Snow smiled gently and looked at the middle-aged man. Demoness at https://www.sashu.com/ full text at https://www.sashu.com// download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 13:19. The two words were faint but there was a cold and terrible murderous aura. As soon as the words fell, the middle-aged man's head was cut off. The head rolled in the blood, and the warm blood spurted all over the ground. No trace of Snow was still standing in the same place, but his robe was a little fluttering, letting people know that he had moved just now. It was just that the speed was too fast, and no one could react. No trace of Snow smiled coldly. "Is my woman someone you can casually criticize?" After he finished speaking, he stepped forward, holding a long sword in one hand and a bamboo umbrella in the other. He walked forward unhurriedly. Everyone finally woke up from the death of the middle-aged man just now. No trace of Snow really betrayed, and it was a betrayal of a massacre. They all took out their weapons and shouted, "Give me your life! No trace of Snow, you hypocrite with blood on your hands." No trace of Snow looked up at the sky. It was still raining. When they met, it was also rainy. He really missed the bits and pieces of getting along with her more and more. No trace of Snow continued to sigh as he walked, but he shrank the ground into an inch, and his body was like a ghost. Everywhere he went, there were piles of corpses. In this year, whether the martial arts people were good or bad, who didn't have blood on their hands? No one was afraid of the dead, but this scene scared people out of their wits. Despair, boundless despair. They were absolutely crushed, and many people didn't dare to pick up any weapons in the future. They even vomited when they saw the blood. No trace of Snow was dressed in white, his silver hair fluttering, and his eyes were still so beautiful. But when he killed 3 people with one sword with a gentle smile, and the blood fell to his cheeks, it was like he had become a demon. In the rain, screams, and the sound of corpses falling, the blood flowed into the steps and gathered into a pool. More than half of the martial arts masters were killed by no trace of Snow's sword. Was he still human? No, he was a demon. Human beings couldn't have such high and terrifying martial arts value. It was impossible for him to be so calm. He could kill so many people and still smile so gently. After this battle, no trace of Snow became completely famous. In the past, he was the Wulin Alliance master. However, it was still an existence that was as vague as a shadow. But now his image had been completely overturned. Frightening at the sound of his name, #1 in the world. Devil, lunatic. It was much scarier than what Wei Wei Bai wanted. She just wanted her to be abandoned by everyone. He had turned himself into a demon that no one dared to provoke. No trace of Snow had been killing for an entire day and night, and he was a little tired. Thinking that Wei Wei Bai was still waiting for him, he stepped over the corpses and walked out. Those who were still alive and were scared out of their wits watched as he walked out with his umbrella. If it wasn't for the fact that the bottom of his robe was soaked in blood, no one would know how many people he had killed. Many people cried out in fear when they saw him walking over. They completely collapsed. No trace of Snow smiled and walked forward. Slowly, his slender figure disappeared into the white rain and fog like a nightmare. He walked back to his home, which was already in ruins. He burned it. After all, Wei Wei Bai wanted him to be homeless, so he might as well solve it with a fire. Doing these things, he was so natural that it was as if he was picking a flower for her. He had never lacked methods to please others. The only thing he lacked was feelings. Now that he had feelings, he could lower his status as much as she wanted. After all, it was just a matter of interest between lovers. What she wanted, he would pamper her and give it to her. Shui Wuhan saw a pigeon with a red ribbon flying over his head. He raised his head to take a look. Address of the full text: https://www.sashu.com// Download of the full text: https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 13:20. Then he stretched out his hand and hit the pigeon with a stone. He caught the pigeon that fell into his palm and saw the words on the red ribbon. It was Wei Wei Bai's. It was an address. The address of the demon's sect's headquarters. His Wei Wei had also learned how to do things in such a roundabout manner. She had re-established the demon's sect by herself. This kind of power and strength. It shouldn't be her. No trace of Snow had all kinds of doubts in his heart, but because she was alive, he felt that it was not important. Now that he thought about it, he felt that she really had the ability to charm people. After all, many of those in the demon sect were lone wolves. They would rather die than lower their heads and be controlled by others. He turned around and walked towards the address of the demon sect. The words on the ribbon, and the following line of words. No trace of snow. I want you to marry me openly again in a sedan chair carried by 8 people. It was still the thoughts of a little girl. She liked these ceremonies so much. No trace of snow smiled faintly, with indescribable gentleness and affection. He didn't just stop at 8 sedan chairs. He wanted to announce to the world that he would marry her in a way that all women in the world would be envious of. He didn't know how long he could live, even if he desperately suppressed his feelings. The number of times he was aroused was still frequent. The sharp pain in his chest, even if it was suppressed by her blood, it was still very painful. No trace of snow knew that as time passed, this sharp pain would become more and more obvious. Maybe one day her blood would no longer work, so his life would not be long. No trace of snow thought that before he died, he would use this Jianghu to win a few happy laughs from her. It was also good. The demon sect's mountain was outside the city, and the righteous sects had suffered heavy losses, so they didn't dare to provoke the demon sect anymore. And today, the demon sect seemed to be holding some kind of happy event. The word happy was posted everywhere, and the people of the demon sect were all jubilant. They gave red packets to people and asked them to attend the wedding of their saintess. The righteous people also heard that Wei Wei Bai was going to get married, and the wedding was going to be especially luxurious. They spat and cursed her as a demoness. But when he thought of no trace of snow, he didn't dare to say anything. They were afraid that the Devil League leader, who had betrayed the pugilistic world, would come and kill them. No trace of snow was bewitched by the witch of the devil cult and massacred the righteous sects of the Walin. Everyone knew about it. Now, anyone who mentioned no trace of snow would be scared to death. After all, that massacre was simply too frightening. No matter how bad the reputation of the demonic sect was, many people still gathered on the wedding day. There were many villains from the evil path, and very few of the righteous path had come, and most of them were in disguise. After all, he had to spy on the enemy. Outside the main hall of the devil cult was a flat stone square. On the way up the mountain, the sound of gongs and drums filled the air. At first, people thought it was normal. They all wanted to see who the man who married Wei Wei Bai was. He saw dozens of people carrying countless gold, silver, and jewels and placing them on the square, followed by silk and satin. Then, there were all kinds of precious treasures and manuals. Along the way, the flowers drifted in the wind. It was simply a celestial atmosphere. In the end, 8 people slowly carried the sedan chair to the square. In front of the sedan chair, a man in a red bridegroom's suit was sitting on a brown horse. His silver hair was tied up with a jade crown. There was a gentle smile on his handsome face, and his eyes were gentle. Being looked at by him seemed to be cherished. It was no trace of snow. Many people were not surprised. After all, everyone knew that no trace of snow was bewitched by Wei Wei Bai and betrayed the righteous path of the Walin. But more people suddenly realized that he was going to marry the saintess of the devil cult. He was the one who betrayed her. /T. Chapter 1321. No trace of snow had a smile at the corner of his mouth. Without the murderous aura he had when he killed people, his every move was elegant and indifferent. Peerless, and magnificent. Feeling was the best way to describe this man. He rode his horse to the front of the square and saw Wei Wei Bai in a red wedding dress, holding a veil in her hand. She was wearing a red wedding dress that dragged on the ground, and there was a delicate rose in her hair. The bright red flower complemented her red lips and snow-white skin. She was breathtakingly beautiful. She stood quietly in the corridor, looking at no trace of snow, smiling sweetly. No trace of snow looked at her in a daze, as if he had returned to the day of their wedding. She was wearing a red wedding dress. At that time, she was also so beautiful. But with one strike of his sword, no trace of snow suppressed the image that he couldn't bear. He dismounted his horse, and his red robe fluttered. Then he stood by the bridal sedan chair, waiting for her to come. He actually wanted to rush over, carry her, and leave. But he was afraid of being rude to her. He wanted to make up for his regret and carry out the wedding rules, as if this was the only way to make up for the huge mistake. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were like chopping onions, her lips were red, and the red wedding dress was covered with a veil. When she walked, she was so beautiful that it was like floating in the clouds. She was more beautiful than ever. No trace of Snow suddenly couldn't control himself. He walked forward step by step, wanting to get to her side faster. But before he could take 3 steps, the knocking sounds were heard again. He frowned and turned back to look, but he saw 4 men going up the mountain. There was a bridge of flowers, betrothal gifts, and all kinds of rare treasures. And the 4 men were all in high spirits and extraordinarily handsome. What made No Trace of Snow stop was not how outstanding they were, but they were all wearing bridal clothes. No Trace of Snow even recognized that one of the men was the heir of a century-old family. He was rich and was known as the little god of wealth. Another was a prince who held military power in his hands. The remaining 2 were very skilled in martial arts. Their reputation was also very well known in Jianghu. These 4 men had different personalities. Although they were all handsome, the way they were beautiful was different. It was like the different kinds of flowers in the garden. They were beautiful in different shapes. The 4 men carried 4 bridal sedan chairs to the quarry. They saw Shui Wuhan. The prince teased, "There's actually a new person? Seriously, Wei Wei has captured the heart of another alliance master." The little god of wealth also sighed helplessly. She likes to collect men's hearts. It seems that we have to squeeze together again. Although he said was sighing, there was pampering. Why did she get another wild man? Could it be that she wants to get 10 or 20 men in the future? There is unspeakable jealousy, but there was also love. No Trace of Snow's smile gradually disappeared. His eyes were like ice beads calm to cold. He looked at the 4 men, then turned to look at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai walked over from the corridor. Her red clothes were bright, and her appearance was charming and innocent. But her eyes were unusually bright and cunning. It was as if the lively Wei Wei of the past had returned. The bells on her ankles seemed to be able to enchant people as they jingled. No Trace of Snow's face was covered with a layer of frost as he watched her walk towards him, until she came in front of him. Her smooth, jade-like face revealed a beautiful smile. Then No Trace of Snow saw her red lips slightly open as she gently said, "Wu Hen, these are your 4 brothers. As the last one to enter the sect, you should serve them tea first." No Trace of Snow, / fast. Chapter 1322. The wind blew coldly across the mountain. The Red She character was blown away by the wind. No Trace of Snow's expression was indifferent. His delicate face had traces of gloominess. He said softly, "Wei Wei Bai, is this a unique wedding gift?" It did seem like something she would do to get a bunch of people to tease him. Wei Wei Bai tilted her head. Her clear and moving eyes looked at him with a smile. "No Trace of Snow, didn't you say that you love me?" No Trace of Snow's deep and cold eyes surged with a complicated and dark emotion. His voice was light and gentle. "I love you, yes." He admitted it so simply and peacefully. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched the Chinese rose beside her hair. Her smile suddenly changed. She frowned and said impatiently, "If you love me, why can't you bear to share me with others? Don't you love me so much that you can die? Can't you be deserted by everyone? It's such a small matter, but you're being so sentimental." Her voice was delicate and charming, but the words she said were so willful that it hurt his heart. Her eyes were filled with annoyance. "All right, do you still want to go through the wedding ceremony? I originally planned to collect a few more men. It would be best if I could collect 7 and add me to 8. That would be an auspicious number, but I couldn't find any good men. I can only continue to look after the wedding." No Trace of Snow said indifferently. "After the wedding, continue to look?" Wei Wei Bai looked at the sky. The sun was shining brightly. She gently and elegantly raised her hand. The little god of wealth immediately rushed over and placed a chair behind her. Then he gently held her hand and helped her to sit on the chair. The prince immediately rushed over to hold an umbrella and whispered, "Damn, the sun today actually made you frown." The other two men also slowly came to her side. Although they were all wearing the same groom's robes, each was handsome in his own way. No trace of Snow was standing opposite her. His expression was cold as he watched Wei Wei enjoy the service of others without any awkwardness. She casually looked up. Her eyes were clear and flirtatious. Her innocence was gone, replaced by a mature charm. It was just like the vicious little girl in his heart who had died for him alone. He grew up overnight. She understood men and knew how to manipulate people's hearts. It was so dazzling that it made people admire it, but it also made people hate it to the bone. In Shui Wuhan's calm eyes, there was only darkness and malice. It was so cold that it could penetrate one's soul. Wei Wei didn't seem to notice the displeasure in his eyes. No, she didn't care at all. She was capricious and said in a crafty tone, "A pile of wood. I'm thirsty." One of the men, who was extremely skilled in Qin Gong, immediately brought some water from a distance. He squatted down and held the cup to feed her. The system said, "Wake up, host. You should know when to stop. If you go too far, you'll be sent to the crematorium in a month's time." None of these four men were good people. All of them had committed heinous crimes and were full of evil. Don't be fooled by the god of wealth or prince. Their hands were stained with blood. Anyway, their hearts were so vicious that they could poison a poisonous snake to death. So when they woke up in a month's time and thought of the humiliation today, the host would probably be ground to dust. Wei Wei gracefully lowered her head and held the cup in her mouth. She took a sip. Her red lips were strangely beautiful. Then she casually raised her head and touched her bracelet. It was a gift from the little god of wealth. "Wu Hen, the auspicious hour is almost over. Are you going to perform the ceremony?" Her tone was very casual, as if it didn't matter if he didn't perform the ceremony. She loved him so much that she would rather die. It became blurry. All that was left was the cruel her in front of him. It was so vivid that the S slashed to the full articles, slashed the downloads to the S, the comma. Chapter 1323. No trace of Snow lowered his eyes, and his lips curled into a smile. "Wei Wei Bai, is this to take revenge on me?" He emphasized the last three words. Although he was disappointed that she still hated him, he never thought that she would humiliate him like this. This humiliation made him feel bad, but it was not to the extent that he would fly into a rage. He had always been used to enduring silently and knew that he had gone overboard. So, it was only right for her to take revenge on him. Who asked him to do the wrong thing? Bai Weiwei was stunned. She suddenly reached out and covered her mouth in surprise. "Retaliate against you? How could I retaliate against you? You're one of my favorite men. I just asked you to serve me tea. Is this retaliating against you?" These words were unreasonable and preposterous. However, she did not seem to be joking at all. "Haven't you already fallen in love with me?" No trace of Snow's dark eyes had a kind of desolate calmness. His smile was a little creepy. "Fall in love with you? Do the four men beside you also fall in love with you?" He did not want to deceive himself. This was not his character. He had always been intelligent and had the ability to see through people's hearts. The infatuation and love in the eyes of the four men was not fake. If they were really acting, they would not be so natural and humble. And Wei Wei did not have any ability to make these four men bow their heads and be a clown for her just to take revenge on him. Wei Wei smiled, and it was indescribably cute. "What do you think?" The four men immediately nodded. "Yes, of course we love you," they said in unison, full of tacit understanding. Wei Wei spread her hands and said with some distress, "After all, you came later. I work hard to gather them. It is my hobby to win men's hearts." Speaking of this, her smile became a little evil, and her eyes were sparkling. She reached out and gently tugged at the corner of No Trace of Snow's clothes. Her voice was sweet and soft, just like Master's hobby. "Don't you like to see those pure people completely break down and go crazy? I'm trying my best to please you according to Master's hobby." No Trace of Snow's pupils shrank. His breathing stopped, and an intense pain suddenly surged out from his chest. He suddenly wanted to cover her mouth and stop her from continuing. He felt that what she was going to say next was extremely cruel. However, Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "Master is really hard to please. I tried so hard to act cute, but you still stabbed me to death. If I wasn't the successor of the demonic sect Sanus and know some evil spells to save my life, I would have really died." The dark abyss and no trace of Snow's chest grew bigger and bigger. With his intelligence, how could he not hear the smugness in her voice, as well as the cold mockery? There was no love. He didn't see anything at all. She reached out and took the Chinese roses from her hair. She held the flowers in her hand lazily, propping up her chin as she looked at him. "I guess I can be considered to have hit it off with my master. We both have some quirks. Master likes to see others fall into despair, while I like to win the hearts of outstanding men. They're my spoils of war, and so is Master." When she said this, she revealed a mischievous smile. "Hateful and cute. I don't like Master that much, but to win your love, I still try my best to pretend to be around you." Wei Wei Bai smiled victoriously, full of a woman's evil appearance. But it was still beautiful enough to steal one's heart. "Seeing you betray everyone for me and marry me personally, I know that Master must love me deeply. If you love me, you should be able to share me with others." Chapter 1324. Her words were bold and presumptuous, but she was as gorgeous as a flame, willful and irresponsible beauty. Her beauty was wanton and flamboyant. She was reborn. Her every move lost its naivety and vicious straightforwardness. That vicious heart was scarier than any woman's. No trace of Snow's breathing stopped. The sharp pain in his chest made him more awake. He could even think about how she looked when she appeared, how she fell in love with him, how she died, and her saying that she didn't love him just to get his heart was as vicious as a game. So it was just a game? It was just like how when he saw her, it was just to play a game. That was why he brought her along. It was just to see her love him and then be abandoned by him. He didn't think too much about it at first, but now that he thought about it carefully, there were indeed many unnatural things. She loved him too quickly, too decisively. She hated him too quickly and fiercely. There was no preparation, no transition buffer. It was just straightforward. Whether it was hate or love, it was just as fast and straightforward. In fact, if he thought about it carefully, this shouldn't be a natural reaction. It was more like an act. It wasn't that there were no flaws, but that he thought that everything was in his hands. He thought that her personality was childlike, crazy, and naive, which was why she was like this. But what if she wasn't a child, and her naivety was just an act? Then her love was just a game. Naturally, he deduced it. From a beginning to the end, when he was playing the game, she was also playing. She was even more skilled than him, more ruthless than him, and more vicious to herself. One thought after another, in Wei Wei Bai's mocking and smug gaze, turned into a terrifying blade. Every blade cut his heart. Blood flowed out, filled with hatred. The humiliation of being teased was actually not as painful as the hatred of holding someone else's hand and saying that he was just a chess piece in her game. How could she not love him? How could she play with him? How could she use such a naive and vicious attitude to tell him that her love for him was nothing more than a pretense? Unwillingness, jealousy, resentment, and madness twisted into a huge whirlpool. No trace of Snow's eyes were terrifyingly dark. His fingers slowly bent, and the red hair band shattered inch by inch. His silver hair fluttered behind his back. For a moment, he looked gloomy and cold. He was like a demon god that made people tremble. "Are you happy? When I fell in love with you, were you happy?" He spoke softly, his eyes fixed on her. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have sensed danger. She frowned in annoyance and then sat up straight. "No trace of Snow, it's just a game. Why are you so agitated? Didn't you have a good time too? Although I had a lot of fun playing this game, I also put in a lot of effort." No trace of Snow looked at her expressionlessly. He suddenly felt that she was still too naive. Or rather, he was not smart enough. Otherwise, how could he destroy his heart like this? Even if it was just a lie to appease him, it would be fine. Wei Wei Bai impatiently pinched the Chinese rose and threw it at No Trace of Snow's feet. All right, don't look like you can't afford to play. Aren't you a hypocrite? How many people have you harmed? I thought that people like you would be more open when playing. She said this and gave him a look of disdain. In the end, you can't afford to play. What love? Do you really want to maintain love for a lifetime? Can't you just get a moment of happiness? Slash. Chapter 1325. Wei Wei Bai said this and became unhappy. Forget it. Today was supposed to be a happy day, but you ruined it. If you don't want to be my little five, I won't bother you. You can leave. She sent him away. It was a simple sentence. A disdainful and impatient attitude. She was really vicious and direct. She didn't have a trace of kindness. She took it for granted and was fearless. No Trace of Snow knew that she didn't have a good temperament, but he didn't expect her to be so cold. She could even play with feelings. How could she play with feelings? Playing with feelings. Was she so confident that she wouldn't make a mistake? No Trace of Snow looked at the men behind her. They were all outstanding and had different personalities and appearances. It seemed that her taste in men was so fickle. She liked the new and hated the old. They were so outstanding. And her methods were indeed good. She even captured his heart. How could others compare to him? Once he fell in love, it would be fatal. He couldn't fall in love with others, but he was completely trapped by her. It was easier for others. She had indeed never made a mistake before. She was better than him. He made a mistake once and lost to her. So it was all a scam. A faint sigh echoed in his heart. That sigh turned into thousands of swords, cutting his flesh and breaking his bones, dismembering him into pieces. No Trace of Snow's face was a little pale. He thought that he only had a few days left to live, so he just had to pamper her. She wanted the sky, the earth, and the stars. He would listen to her. Stirring up a storm of blood to win her good mood for a day was something he was willing to do. He thought again, if she really liked men's hearts so much, he could be little five and make her happy. He could be little five as long as the first four died. The pain in No Trace of Snow's chest had already exceeded the limits of what a human could bear. But he still looked calm. He reached out and gently held her fingers. His voice trembled, but in the end, he softened his temper. Okay, are you really going to be angry with me? You're just making me angry. It was the final struggle, the desolation of dying. Wei Wei Bai slapped his hand away. She stood up and looked at him coldly. You're so annoying. You were more fun in the beginning. I don't like you now. After saying that, she turned around without hesitation. No, I'm not in a good mood today. The four of you can come and marry me tomorrow. The other four men wailed at the same time. Wei Wei, you're really tormenting us to death when you play games. Wei Wei Bai glared back fiercely and said, if you don't like it, then get lost. Who cares about you? It's just a game. I have plenty of men who can play it. The rest of the men immediately surrendered. All right, we'll get married tomorrow. I guarantee you'll be happy. Only then did Bai Wei Wei reveal a smile. Then she turned and left. The long red wedding dress dragged on the ground, and it was the same gorgeous color as her. Bai Wei Wei walked with her head held high and said, Queen, I am a proper queen. You should have let me capture such a good plane long ago. All men are just ants. They have to kneel and call me daddy. The system held its forehead. It couldn't bear to see the host courting death to this extent. Did you know? The male main plane's martial strength is #1. Wei Wei Bai smiled innocently. Didn't you have a serious injury? Also, aren't those four masters very powerful? Even though the four experts were all evil people who had committed countless evil deeds, they were still alive. Their martial arts were indeed very high. The system was silent, then said, #1 in martial strength means that if everyone in this plane worked together to go against him, they would all be killed by him. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1326. Wei Wei Bai thought that the strongest in martial arts was a few masters who could kill No Trace of Snow. However, the strongest in martial arts was the child of the realm. That was literally what it meant. That was fucking it. He was really #1. The #1 that no one could kill. No matter how many masters came together, they would not be able to defeat No Trace of Snow in a few moves. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps became heavy. You're saying, the system said, if he wants to kill someone, all the masters in the demonic sect combined would not be enough to kill him alone. Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. How much is the heartbreak value? The system was in despair. 80. Oh my God. The heartbreak value was a publicly recognized number that could not increase wildly. Because the pain of the heartbreak value increasing by 1 point was real desperation. In the end, No Trace of Snow's heartbreak value actually increased by tens of points. This was simply killing. Wei Wei Bai said, actually, I want to show off a little and let No Trace of Snow suffer for a while to increase the heartbreak value. Then, I'll chase him down the mountain and use the tender heart strategy next time. The system said, chase him down the mountain. The idea was good, but how to chase No Trace of Snow down the mountain? As for the tender heart strategy, did the host have any ambiguity about the word tender heart? What tender heart when he was already tortured to this extent? Wei Wei Bai seemed to know the system's doubts. She muttered, I thought that with so many masters in the demonic sect, and 4 of them, there shouldn't be a big problem. Plus, No Trace of Snow had hurt himself because of his emotions. So to chase him away, it should be very easy, ah? Screams suddenly sounded. Wei Wei Bai and the system trembled at the same time. They stiffened their necks and looked behind them. Then they saw a terrifying scene. A shocking wave of inner energy, like a colorless and invisible terrifying blade, spread rapidly with No Trace of Snow as the center. The person standing next to him was killed in an instant. The expressions of the hypnotized evil men beside Wei Wei Bai changed as they drew their weapons at the same time. However, No Trace of Snow acted as if he did not see them. His silver hair fluttered behind him, his posture was tall and elegant, and his red robes fluttered in the wind. Like fire, like the coldest fireworks. She was astonishingly beautiful, yet cold and cruel. He held a long sword in his hand. His eyelashes were drooping, and his eyes were dark. His eyes were fixed on Wei Wei Bai. Then, step by step, he slowly walked towards Wei Wei Bai. There was even a smile at the corner of his mouth. His handsome face was as dazzling as the sun, but his deep and dark eyes carried with them a crazy and twisted evil aura, like an immortal or a demon. It was both good and evil, but in the same person, it was so contradictory that it was breathtaking. Wei Wei Bai and the system trembled at the same time. Fuck, why can't anyone escape from him? The system said, number 1 in the world. The 4 great evil men were killed by him. He killed the 4 great evil men with just 3 slashes. The system said, I said number 1 in the world, so it means number 1 in the world. This number 1 was not discounted at all. Did Wei Wei Bai think that it was the system that gave the reward? No Trace of Snow was the child of the plane. All of his luck and blessings were hardcore and unshakable. It was not something that the system could compare to the host. Wei Wei Bai said, I'll run first. The system reached out its hand, wanting her to wait for death in peace, but felt that it was too cruel. It could only say, then run, live for a few more seconds. You can torture me, but you can't torture me like this. She directly tortured No Trace of Snow to insanity, and no one could withstand it. Wei Wei Bai lifted her skirt and ran forward. She said as she ran, Can I show off? I just showed off for a few minutes, and now I'm a coward. The system said earnestly, Young people, you have to be careful when you show off. Don't do this in the future. Wei Wei Bai slowed down. She could not run anymore, because someone had stepped on her skirt. Tongzi, I feel that I don't have a future. The system turned around and then silently turned around. Go in peace. The person who stepped on her skirt gently placed a pale and slender hand on her thin shoulder. His hand was very cold. She could feel the cold temperature of his fingers through her clothes. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath. She had seen ghosts before. Why would she be afraid of seeing ghosts? Just as she was about to turn around, a familiar embrace had already pressed against her back and held onto her waist. His lips had already sucked on her sensitive ear. Wei Wei Bai. His voice was cold and hoarse. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. She felt his teeth biting her ear, and then a cold laugh filled with hostility rang out. Aren't you going to get married? I'm willing to be your Xiaowu, but unfortunately, I've killed all your other men. Wei Wei Bai, it felt good to show off, but the one-stop service at the crematorium was even better. // Chapter 1327. Wei Wei Bai sat on the edge of the bed with a red veil over her head. She complained to the system, "Is no trace of Snow planning to rape me before killing me?" She couldn't move. Her acupuncture points were sealed, and she was forced to sit there. The red veil blocked her vision, making it impossible for her to see her surroundings. No trace of Snow's light body technique was also very good. His footsteps were silent, so she couldn't hear what he was doing when he came and went. The system hesitated. He's sitting. Wei Wei Bai, sitting where? The system opposite you. You're sitting on the bed, and he's sitting on the chair opposite you. He's staring at you without blinking. His eyes are bloodshot, and there's a long sword on his knees. He's wiping it off slowly. The murderous aura around him is so strong that it's hard to breathe. He looks like he wants to kill someone, or kill someone. Anyway, he's looking at you with murderous eyes. Stop, 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 stop. You're talking so fast. Are you writing a novel? Wei Wei Bai couldn't take it anymore. No trace of Snow was holding a sword, sitting opposite her, and looking at her with murderous eyes. What a simple and neat summary. Why did he have to be so long-winded? But thinking about it this way, being long-winded and neat were both equally scary. No trace of Snow was probably too agitated. His mind was now filled with thoughts of how to torture her. Thinking about how she was courting death, there was no way out at all. Wei Wei Bai sighed. She forgot to increase his favorability after grinding her heart. Who asked Xue Wuhan to be so tormented? She only cared about torturing him to death. She forgot that she still had to grind his favorability. No trace of Snow probably wouldn't increase his favorability now. She had said it herself. This was a game. Who would have a favorable impression of a game? One shouldn't be too cocky. Once it was over, it would really be over. Wei Wei Bai sat there stiffly for a long time. She couldn't speak and couldn't move her limbs. Her muscles were numb, as if her blood circulation was not good. After all, sealing her acupuncture points could hinder the speed of blood flow or something. Wei Wei Bai talked nonsense to the system. Say, if I lose my memory again and become a little white rabbit or retard, will no trace of Snow take pity on me? The system said, don't make up old stories, I beg you. If you're tired of the innocent and naive ones, then use the retarded ones. If you were the main character of the novel, you'd be whipped to death by the readers. By Wei Wei. Isn't it because I can't help it? Now that we've reached this stage, we won't rest until we're dead. If we don't start from scratch, we won't be able to increase our favorability. The system said, I told you not to be so arrogant, but you just had to go to the point of no return. By Wei Wei. I have a detailed plan. The system, what's the plan? Wei Wei Bai said, no trace of Snow was caught by my master. I'll tie him up and whip him every day. I'll give him a treat once in a while, then continue to torture him physically and mentally. I'll whip him 3 times a day, then I'll treat him better. He'll definitely have Stockholm Syndrome in the future. Then the favorability points will be full, and so will the torture points. The system quickly dug its ears. Wait, don't say a bunch of delusional words. How'd you come up with this stupid plan? Wei Wei Bai said, everyone does that. The system was confused. Which everyone? Wei Wei Bai said, protagonists of torture novels are all like that. Torture the heart, torture the lungs, and dig out the uterus and dig out the kidneys. In the end, we'll have a happy new year. The system. Reading novels really lowers your IQ. You should read more textbooks next time. Study hard so that you can get beaten up every day. TUI. Improve every day. The Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. / the Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. / Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. / to make it easier for you to read next time. You can click save at the bottom to record this reading. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Comma. Chapter 1328. No trace of snow did not move or make a sound. Wei Wei Bai also did not move or make a sound. She chatted with the system until the latter half of the night. She could not help but lower her eyes tiredly and fall asleep. After all, she had seen so many cruel scenes. She was used to resting quickly in a harsh environment to regain her energy. Just as she was about to fall asleep, the red veil on her head was suddenly pulled away. The candlelight flickered. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes wide with tears in her eyes. Her lips were red, and her pink face had traces of innocent enchantment. She was wearing a red wedding dress and was as beautiful as a delicate porcelain doll. No trace of Snow's face was still pale. He had already changed into his groom's clothes. He was wearing a clean white robe, and his silver hair was tied up, revealing his full forehead and a pair of deep and beautiful eyes. He did not expect that his groom's clothes would be stained with blood, so he did not have a change of clothes. He could only wear his own clothes. They were white like mourning clothes. He lowered his eyes to look at her, then gently reached out his hand to hold her face. His voice was soft and empty, with a kind of strange gentleness. Wei Wei, I just thought about it, and feel that you are cuter when you are alive. Wei Wei Bai saw a gloomy, murderous intent in his eyes. She always felt that when he said that she was cute, he was actually going to break her neck. He revealed a smile. So during this period of time, I will have to trouble you to accompany me. During this period of time before he died, the pain of love would madly devour his body. Even the best martial arts in the world could not stop the speed of death. When he was wiping his sword just now, he was actually suppressing the violent and painful murderous intent in his heart. He wanted to kill her, because she made him feel humiliated and embarrassed. Of course, most of it was the fear of her abandoning him. No trace of Snow, who had played games for half of his life, was always in a high position and at ease. But she pulled him down from the altar and stepped on him wantonly. There had never been a woman who could tease and deceive him like this. No trace of Snow accepted his loss wholeheartedly. Therefore, he should have killed her to regain some of his dignity. No trace of Snow gently kissed her face and saw a flash of fear in her eyes. What a cunning little fox to be afraid of him. Vicious and cowardly. In fact, she didn't have a heart and wouldn't fall in love. He was too selfish and only knew how to love himself. No trace of Snow felt like he was looking at his former self. He was very selfish. So what if everyone in the world is dead, as long as I'm happy? It was a miracle to fall in love with Wei Wei Bai. Unfortunately, this miracle could not happen a second time. No trace of Snow coldly saw the indifference in her eyes, as well as the disdainful ridicule towards love. Well, she didn't love him, not to mention falling in love with someone else. He kissed her lips, and a few strands of silver hair fell beside her eyes. She frowned in discomfort, but couldn't struggle because she couldn't move. No trace of Snow tenderly reached out his fingers and covered her cheeks, preventing his hair from sticking to her face. He seemed to still be that incomparably gentle teacher. Wei Wei Bai, I'll unseal your acupuncture points, and we'll drink wine. Spring nights are short. Tonight is our wedding night, and I want to leave you good memories. No trace of Snow's face was pale, but his smile was sincere. His fingers accurately hit a few of her acupuncture points. Wei Wei Bai immediately felt her blood flow smoothly. She slowly recovered and found that she could move her limbs. The TXT. Chapter 1329. She immediately gasped for breath, her eyes trembling a few times, but she still forced a sweet smile. Master, you really scared me to death. She smiled as if she had forgotten the cruel words she said. The thickness of her skin was amazing. Shui Wuhan didn't expose her fake smile at all. He brought the wine over. Drink some. Wei Wei Bai tactfully brought it over. After all, it was too torturous. She was afraid that no trace of Snow would go crazy and kill her directly. After all, no trace of Snow sat there for so long without saying anything, just thinking about how to kill her. She knew his temperament too well. Although he did not kill her for now, if she did something out of line, he would change his mind at any time. No trace of Snow's temperament was temperamental and unpredictable. No Trace of Snow also brought the wine for himself. Come, hook my arm. Wei Wei Bai obediently hooked her arm around his arm, feeling the firm and powerful muscles under his clothes. She twitched her mouth and said to the system, No Trace of Snow has calmed down. No Trace of Snow was too good at pretending. She could not understand his emotions at the moment. The system said, according to his physical condition, heartbeat, and the tension of his muscles, he is still in a state of irritation. Wei Wei Bai said, If only I can knock him down, that would be good. No Trace of Snow's current condition was too unstable. She did not dare to take the risk of teasing him too much. The system said, There is a strong anesthetic on sale recently. 5 days of life is enough to knock down an elephant. Do you want it? 5 days was still bearable. Wei Wei Bai immediately nodded. Yes, put it in No Trace of Snow's wine glass. The system said, Okay. Then it bought the lowest grade and cheapest 5 days of anesthetic and threw it into No Trace of Snow's glass. After all, even though the current situation seemed calm, it was actually just a pretense before the storm. The darkness in No Trace of Snow's eyes did not lessen at all. Therefore, he still had to restrain No Trace of Snow to give the host some time to think about what to do next. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and drank the wine quietly. When No Trace of Snow's lips touched the wine, he paused. His deep eyes flashed with a trace of anger. Then he calmly drank the wine. After the two hypocrites finished drinking, they looked at each other in silence. Wei Wei Bai was waiting for the anesthetic to take effect, so she obediently put her hands on her knees, leaned forward a little, and looked at him with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. If he could take down No Trace of Snow, she immediately bound him with 10 or 8 chains. She had gained experience from being imprisoned. It was time for her to imprison her target. She had a lot of experience, so she was very familiar with a one-stop service in the little dark room. Let No Trace of Snow enter the little dark room first. Then think of a way to increase his favorability. The current No Trace of Snow had a heartbreaking value of 80, so Wei Wei Bai was very worried. No Trace of Snow sat quietly and elegantly. Then he reached for the wine bottle, poured himself another glass, and drank slowly. He looked at her strangely, as if wondering why he was fine. But she did not know that the unknown poison she put in him had already been forced out by him with his inner energy. The smell of the wine was different, and he could tell the difference with just a sniff. She was so cunning. How could he not guard against her? The system saw that Wei Wei Bai was still waiting for the anesthetic to take effect, so it could only helplessly say to her, We miscalculated. Wei Wei Bai? ? The system said the amount of anesthetic was too small, plus it had a smell, so the male lead noticed it. He forced most of the anesthetic out of his body, and the remaining amount was unable to do anything to him. Chapter 1330. Wei Wei Bai. Because this was the first time that the system's products had lost their effects, Wei Wei Bai was still confused. She was still very confident in the system's products. After all, this was a product that surpassed human technology. It should be impossible for humans to resist and fail. So when it failed for the first time, she did not react at all. She watched as No Trace of Snow finished speaking and drank the whole pot of wine. His face started to turn red, and his eyes lit up. Wei Wei Bai did not know if it was because she was infected by him. She also started to feel hot. She frowned slightly. Her face was as pink as a peach blossom, delicate and pure. It was really unimaginable. Her heart was actually as cold and selfish as his. No Trace of Snow finished drinking all the wine, then walked in front of her and slowly squatted down. His handsome and pale face was dyed red, pale and cold, with a few traces of wilted red. It was so stunning that it seduced people's souls. Wei Wei Bai trembled and finally realized that something was wrong. The crazy heat that surged up in her body was a strong aphrodisiac. The system realized in hindsight. Host, you've been drugged. Wei Wei Bai despised the system. This was obvious without needing to be said, and she was not the only one who was drugged. No Trace of Snow drank the medicine himself. They took the medicine together, ate the medicine together, and loved each other in the same bed. No Trace of Snow squatted in front of Wei Wei Bai and put his hand on her soft fingers on her knee. His gentleness was like water, and the deep affection in his eyes was intoxicating. Wei Wei, do you know that there's a special kind of goo in Miaojiang? Wei Wei Bai frowned, and sweat appeared on her forehead. She forced a smile. Master, please spare me. I know you're angry, but I'm only angry that you killed me. I actually still like you. That's why I found another man to anger you. Look at her, what a clever mouth. She knew that she was in danger. He immediately changed his attitude and put away his threatening appearance. She put on a pretentious and obedient look. Her adorable appearance had captured the hearts of many men. No trace of Snow realized that he couldn't think too deeply because he didn't know how many men he had slept with. He just couldn't stand it. No trace of Snow's smile deepened. Master knows that you do like me, but this love is not unique, so let me help you. He moved his finger and a small bamboo tube appeared on his finger. So what if he liked games? He was a gamer. When a gamer was used to being high and mighty, he would not have sincere feelings for the chess pieces in the game. Her feelings were very cheap. No trace of Snow opened the bamboo tube and calmly explained, the wine you're drinking is from my 1,000 days of spring. After drinking the wine, you'll be very hot. This is the perfect time to let this thing enter your body. Wei Wei Bai, hibernating spring, this name sounds a little slutty. Then she saw a black worm crawling out of the bamboo tube. Wei Wei Bai trembled. Tongzi, a worm. The system also trembled. So scary, a worm. Wei Wei Bai. The worm was extremely fast and drilled into Wei Wei Bai's fingertip in an instant. The system couldn't stop it in time. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed and immediately pinched her finger. She knew that this thing was definitely not a good thing. No trace of Snow gently looked at her futile struggle. On his finger, there was another large bug. Do you know what this is? This is the 1,000 days of spring's goo. Your goo is female and belongs to the category of goo. I'm a male and dominate you. Wei Wei Bai's expression finally darkened. No trace of Snow. What kind of goo did you put in me? Everyone knew that goo was definitely not a good thing. No trace of Snow's deep and dark eyes had a strange light. He smiled and his eyes were full of charm. Less goo. This goo will make you beg me to love you. If you don't beg me for a day, you will die. Wei Wei Bai's eyes glazed over for a moment. Her body suddenly burned with a terrifying heat. Her lips trembled, and she finally couldn't take it anymore. No trace of Snow. I'm going to kill you. No trace of Snow stretched out his hand and pushed her onto the bed. Her limbs were already limp, and she was sweating. Her face was flushed, and she had no strength to resist. He stretched out his hand and gently stroked her sweaty hair. Okay, you can kill me on the bed. If she couldn't focus, he forced her to focus. Because it wasn't a good habit to be half-hearted. He was her master. He had the responsibility to teach her how stupid it was to get a man's heart and then abandon him. // Chapter 1331. The system reminded her, stop looking around. I'm going to be blocked again. The host's shifty-eyed look was indescribably wretched. Wei Wei Bai helplessly touched her face. Look at my face. It's too thin, although it has a melancholy beauty. The system expressionlessly interrupted. There are many black, wriggling worms in your body fighting for food. Of course you'll become thin. In the future, big worms will give birth to little worms, and little worms will give birth to little worms. Crawling out of your eyes, you'll have a dense beauty. Wei Wei Bai. She suddenly felt that the oval face in the bronze mirror was a little scary. Wei Wei Bai immediately put down the bronze mirror, refusing to imagine the system's words. Then she took out a hairpin. It's not good to mess around like this every day. Lying in bed every day will make me useless. It's better to do something serious. The system said, the male lead is here. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed. She looked at the table coldly, her long hair loose, a murderous look in her eyes. She tried to take a few deep breaths, her fingers trembling. As if she was mentally prepared, she used the hairpin in her hand to stab her wrist. Before she could stab it, a white, slender finger held her wrist tightly. Then, a teasing voice rang out. What's wrong, little witch? We haven't seen each other for so long. Why are you hurting yourself the moment we meet? His tone had a hint of suppressed nervousness, as well as anger that was about to explode. but they were all easily suppressed by him. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She looked up and found that it was no trace of Snow wearing a mask. White Magnolia. Unexpected shock. She originally wanted to pretend to commit suicide, then stab No Trace of Snow. She wanted to let him know that she was forced into a desperate situation. If he didn't give her some personal space, she would die with him. But this plan couldn't be used. After all, the secret that White Magnolia and No Trace of Snow were the same person. She hadn't exposed him yet. The hatred on Wei Wei Bai's face disappeared. She threw away the hairpin in her hand and revealed a lazy smile. What? You can enter and leave this place as you please, but you still don't know what happened to me? No Trace of Snow saw her smile, even if it was a smile of impatience. He continued to stare blankly for a few seconds, because he hadn't seen her smile in a while. During this time, he could only get her obedience in bed. Once she sobered up a little, she would look at him with disgust and hatred. Like him, she liked to play games. No Trace of Snow knew the character of this kind of person. Freedom was very important. What they wanted was to live a cold, selfish, and reckless life. But now, she was trapped in a cage. It would be strange if she didn't resent him for breaking her wings. She had lost a lot of weight recently, and she was also very irritated. Her condition was getting worse and worse. He knew that if this continued, she would go crazy. No Trace of Snow endured the anger of seeing her hurt herself. His voice changed completely. I heard that you and your master became enemies, so I came to see if I could take over. After all, you used to like your master. I'd be asking for trouble if I went forward. Wei Wei Bai heard this. She couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. She pushed him away and said fiercely, "Don't pretend to be nice to this old lady. You're just here to take advantage of me when I'm in trouble. Even if I were to rot on Xue Wuhan's bed, I wouldn't let a shameful turtle like you have a chance." She was still vicious and crafty, but finally there was a little more vitality. Slash. Chapter 1332. No Trace of Snow silently touched his mask to make sure it wouldn't fall off. He then said softly, "What's wrong? Have you become stupid after being imprisoned? You actually want to rot in the bed of the man who imprisoned you." Wei Wei Bai leaned against the dressing table and curled a lock of black hair. She looked at him coldly. "What's your purpose? Do you think No Trace of Snow will let you go if I shout now?" No Trace of Snow was a little greedy for the willful and unruly look that finally appeared on her face. She looked better like this than her lifeless and hateful look. He couldn't help but reach out to touch her face. Without the mask, he couldn't see her like this. She hated him so much that she didn't even look at him. Wei Wei Bai's eyes hardened. She picked up the hairpin that she had just thrown away and fiercely stabbed it into his palm. No Trace of Snow flipped his hand and snatched the hairpin. He frowned. "A woman's heart is really the most poisonous. I saw that you were bored and wanted to take you out for a walk." Wei Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe and finally said with a frown, "It's been so long, and you still don't have a name?" No Trace of Snow knew that she wouldn't go with someone so easily. She was very vigilant. So he was silent for a moment and then said indifferently, "I'm called by Magnolia." Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. She suddenly raised the corner of her mouth. "You're the Bai Magnolia who was framed by No Trace of Snow for killing his family?" No Trace of Snow? Yes, that hypocrite, the Wuling Alliance master, killed who knows how many people and framed them all on me. So I planned to steal his most precious thing to take revenge on him. To make her feel better. He didn't hesitate to ruin himself. Sure enough, Wei Wei Bai laughed. She laughed until she didn't have the strength to rest her head on her arm. Her ink-black hair hung loosely behind her back, and her sweet smile was enough to charm any man. No Trace of Snow looked down, and his breathing became heavier. Wei Wei Bai casually got up. She was barefoot, and the bell on her ankle jingled. She came in front of him and suddenly reached out to take off his mask. No Trace of Snow blocked her and didn't let her succeed. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, but she didn't take another step forward. She said, "Ugly, take me away," without waiting for No Trace of Snow to say anything. She had already said, "I am the one you want, Xue Wuhan's most precious treasure." Xue Wuhan was speechless for a moment before she reached out and picked her up. Then, she jumped out of the window. His qigong was a flying of snow was. Bai Weiwei nestled in his arms and arrogantly ordered, "Hey, bastard, run forward. It's very high. The scenery is good. Of snow, of snow, snow, of snow, snow. If it weren't for the fact that she was happy, he would have thrown her down." He carried her and ran over the high rooftops. The scenery was picturesque. She was even more beautiful. Finally, she pointed to the top of the mountain, where the sunset was beautiful. "Bastard, do you have any wine?" Wei Bai was too lazy to order him around. No trace of snow silently took out a bottle of wine. She had not eaten much recently, but he forced her to eat. She couldn't eat, or perhaps she ate very little. Seeing her body getting thinner by the day and her eyes gradually losing life, the pain in his chest spread to his entire body. Even if he was going to die, he wouldn't let her have an easy time. That was why he dragged her along with him to be tortured in hell. But when he saw that she was about to break down, he couldn't bear to do it. Wei Bai held the bottle of wine and didn't say anything. She sat on the mountaintop, facing the wind. Her fluttering dress was blown up by the wind. She looked at the setting sun with an expressionless face and drank the wine. No trace of snow pretended not to care. He took out the wine and planned to coax her to eat some. Chapter 1333. In the end, she suddenly said, "If I jump down from here, will no trace of snow be angry?" No trace of snow paused in his actions of placing the dishes. He raised his eyes, filled with ruthlessness and gloom. He endured it, his voice trembling slightly. "This is not like you. Aren't you the kind of vicious woman who wants to take revenge after being bullied?" Wei Bai's voice was indifferent and casual. "I'm a person who holds grudges. No trace of snow, that bastard, did this to me. I even have the heart to kill him." No trace of snow suppressed the bloody taste of despair in his voice. "Then kill him. What's the point of you jumping off a cliff to take revenge on him?" Bai Weiwei shook the bottle of wine, her face slightly flushed with drunkenness. "Kill him. If only I could bear to." No trace of snow was silent for a moment. He slowly raised his head, almost unable to believe what he had heard. Wei Bai's attention was not on him. She shook out the last bit of wine and slowly drank it. The wind blew through her black hair. Her eyebrows were stunning. "If I didn't know that he would die if he fell in love with me, how could I bear to humiliate him and hate him like that?" No trace of snow was stunned. His usually calm mind froze. Only her back view and her lonely words were clear as they rushed into his heart. His martial arts are good at killing people, but even better at killing himself. My blood can't save him at all. The only way is to prevent him from falling in love. When she said this, she suddenly burst into laughter. She laughed very happily. "He likes me. He loves me. I'm so happy." When Wei Bai said this, she turned to look at No Trace of Snow, her eyes shining with happiness. "Rat, you don't know how it feels to be loved by the person you like." No Trace of Snow's eyes were already red, but the mask hid his complicated expression. He pursed his lips. "Humph, are you talking your sleep? Don't you like to collect men's hearts?" Wei Bai's smile changed, and she snorted. "Idiot! How can you believe such rumors? Am I really the kind of woman who likes to collect outstanding men? Do I not have a place in the legends of Jianghu?" These words woke him up from his dream. No Trace of Snow had always felt that something was wrong, but the pain she gave him was too heavy. As a result, he did not think deeply. Indeed, if she was really that powerful, why didn't she have any reputation before? Wei Bai laughed proudly. "Master is so gullible. I deliberately found several men to provoke him, and he really believed me." No Trace of Snow was silent. Then he said, "Those men, aren't they all Prince's little god of wealth? If they don't like you, why, Wei Bai, do I have to like them just because they like me? I don't care about other men's hearts. If it weren't for them acting, I wouldn't even see them." No Trace of Snow felt a sharp pain in his chest. There was even a taste of blood in his mouth, but this was different from despair. This was because of the surge of hope. The pain of falling in love again was even more intense. Wei Bai was drunk. She said with a smile, "If I do this, Master will not like me and abandon me. This way he can live." As she spoke, her eyes were lonely, and the tears in her eyes finally appeared. But how can he do this? How can he still like me? I hurt him so deeply. The tears in her eyes fell. The grievance and sadness almost broke her. I want him to hate me. I want him to live. He can't love me. The hatred and no trace of Snow's chest was shattered by her words. What replaced it was the pain of regret and the joy that she liked him. Wei Wei Bai wiped her tears and said while crying, I can't leave him now. He's going to die soon. How can I save him? Was it all fake? No trace of Snow's fingers trembled as he reached out. He wanted to hug her. It turned out that those words were all fake. She was still that little disciple who liked him. Bai Weiwei suddenly turned around with incredible speed. She hugged Xue Wuhan, and while he was in a daze, she took off his mask. No trace of Snow did not stop her. She loved him. It didn't matter if she found out who she was. But when the mask was removed, he saw a cold smile in her eyes. She held the mask in her hand. All the sadness and love disappeared. There was only a careless teasing. I knew it. What, White Magnolia? So it's you, Master. Xue Wuhan's handsome face froze in a daze for a moment. He was still stuck in the beautiful dream that she liked him. But Bai Weiwei was like a viper. She was light and cold, and her laughter was mocking. Master, I already knew that White Magnolia was you. Were you satisfied with your disciple's performance? Your disciple really likes you. You just like to hear me say this, right? She slowly wrapped her body around him. Her fingers stroked the back of his neck. She said slowly, enchanting and vicious, as if I was just toying with you. I was toying with you from the beginning to the end. I didn't have any feelings for you at all. After saying that, a poisonous needle appeared in her hand, and she stabbed it into the back of his neck. This was a fatal wound. She wanted him dead. She was resolute and cold. Save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1334. The system that originally thought that Wei Wei Bai was playing dumb to increase the favorability was so scared that the sausage in its hand broke into two pieces. Don't do this. The favorability is about to die. Without waiting for the system to roar. No trace of Snow had already spat out a mouthful of blood, but his hand was already clamping down on the needle in her hand. Absolute strength was completely different from their martial strength. Even if Wei Wei Bai used all of her evil schemes, her body speed was still not faster than his. The needle in her hand was taken away and her fingertips were numb. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed, but she immediately jumped away from him and ran towards a cliff. The wind was strong, making her dress look especially good when it fluttered. But the place she was standing at was a bottomless abyss. No trace of Snow stood there in a daze. His knot broke out, the pain of love and resentment in his heart. Love and hate intertwined to form a terrifying power that turned the sky and earth upside down in his body. The corner of his mouth was covered in blood, and his eyes carried traces of sadness as he looked at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be as heartless as before. Her eyes were indifferent, and the corners of her mouth carried a smile as she looked at him with ridicule. I say, no trace of Snow, you're too gullible. You believe me just because I say I like you. You're too narcissistic. No trace of Snow's face in the afterglow had a kind of cold sadness. He seemed to be unable to hold on as he staggered, but he still walked step by step towards Wei Wei Bai, like a moth to a flame. She was like a heartless flame. He had always been chasing after her, but he had never moved her. Wei Wei Bai saw him coming over, so she frowned and said unhappily, "Stay away from me, or else I'll jump." No trace of Snow's silver hair draped over his body. His temperament was floating, but it carried a mournful despair. He said, "You jump." Wei Wei Bai saw that he was really walking over, with one foot already outside the cliff. She said provocatively, "Do you really think I don't dare to jump?" Her face had lost its innocence, but it was as beautiful as fire. Every frown and every smile was so warm that people couldn't look away. No trace of Snow looked at her with red eyes and a smile on his face, but there was a strange sense of vulnerability in his expression. "If you jump, I'll jump too." Wei Wei Bai was stunned, and the smile on her face froze. Her eyes hardened and she sneered. I've never seen a man like you. You were fine at the beginning, but why did you fall in love with me and want to die? Can love be treated as life? You're about to lose your life. Don't you feel uncomfortable vomiting blood like this? No trace of snow. I look down on you. If you're a man, you can let go. If you fall in love, you can stop loving. If you fall in love, you can suppress your feelings. Look at yourself now. You're a good-for-nothing, a coward. No trace of snow looked at her in a daze. Suddenly, he vomited another mouthful of blood. His body couldn't take it any longer. The deeper the feelings, the stronger the martial arts backlash. He was in so much pain that he didn't want to live. He couldn't even beg for death, but he still walked over step by step. Wei Bai was forced to take half a step back, and the rocks on the cliff began to fall down. His footsteps hesitated, and he was already standing in front of her. Behind him was also a bottomless abyss. There was a distance between the two of them, and they stared at each other. The system looked at them and felt that they were waiting in line to jump off the cliff. The next line would probably be, "Hello, friend. Are you here to jump off the cliff too?" What a coincidence, so am I. No trace of Snow's face that had lost his mask was extremely pale. His eyes were extremely deep, like a bottomless abyss with a boundless aura of death. The blood at the corner of his mouth surged up again. Chapter 1335. The bright red blood was a ghastly sight. The strength of the crazy counterattack made his vision turn black. He felt like he was going to die. During this period of time, he let his feelings run amok. He also let his body experience the joy of complete indulgence. His body and soul completely violated the reverse scale that should not be touched. The pain in his body hissed in his bones. No trace of Snow took half a step back. The cliff was behind him. He looked at her face greedily. This might be enough. It was enough to let her go. She was such a selfish and willful person. During this period of time, she was tortured to this state by him. No trace of Snow did not think of doing more, but when she went on a hunger strike, he knew that she would not really let him die. He still found that he could not bear to. Loving a person made the armor turn into thorns and stab himself. No trace of Snow reached out his hand. Across the air, his fingertips seemed to be able to touch her cold face. Wei Bai seemed to be a little vigilant. Although her face was more delicate, it had lost its full health. His fingertips moved slightly. In the end, he gave up the idea of pushing her off the cliff. The sun had set. Darkness began to spread on the mountaintop. The mountain wind began to howl and become cold. No trace of Snow looked up at the sky. There was blood in his mouth. He had never complained about the heavens or the earth. It had always been a world where the strong preyed on the weak. If he lost, so what if he died? So he did not feel guilty at all when he teased and ravaged the weak. Instead, he mocked them coldly and looked at them coldly from above. As for Bai Weiwei, it was the game where he suffered the most from his own bad karma. No trace of Snow's face in the darkness suddenly became soft and gentle. He slowly revealed a smile. Even the afterglow of the sun, just now, was not as beautiful as his smile. Weiwei, I never thought that I would die so cowardly. His words were laced with the taste of blood, but his expression did not change at all. However, the flesh and blood on his body began to shatter, causing his body to tremble. I've never been afraid of death. Those who had made a name for themselves in Jianghu were not afraid of death. But after meeting you, this is the first time I've ever wished that I could live. Only when he was alive could he hold on to her firmly and not let go. Bai Weiwei's words were actually correct. After meeting her, he was indeed a coward and a good-for-nothing. He was even afraid of death. No trace of Snow retracted his hand. His smile was gentle and bloodthirsty. Forget it. I'll let you go. This was his rare act of kindness. He had never been so soft-hearted before. No trace of Snow took a step back and fell down the cliff. Love had entered the heart and could not be undone. He couldn't escape the deadlock. Because he couldn't escape from her, Bai Weiwei watched as his body leaned back and fell. She rushed over without much thought. The system also roared, "Who asked you to torture him? Torture the male, lead to death." Fuck, male lead, aren't you very capable? Why did you suddenly become so disheartened that you jumped off the cliff to commit suicide? Wei Wei Bai said. I didn't even jump, but he jumped first. What a weird move. The system said, You're the weird one. Wei Wei Bai said, Am I not trembling in fear and trying to farm heartache value? The system face-bombed. Heartache value is 99. Favorability value, 95. This was so miserable. The favorability value actually increased so much when No Trace of Snow jumped off the cliff. What kind of personality did No Trace of Snow have? The heartache value could not increase, but he would increase it greatly every time. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1336. The favorability would either not move or would jump straight up. Extreme personality, extreme favorability, and extreme hatred. Wei Wei Bai pounced forward, her right hand grabbing on a No Trace of Snow sleeve. Thanks to the wide robe, the sleeve was also very long. However, No Trace of Snow's weight increased, causing the sleeve to split open. Wei Wei Bai disregarded everything and used her other hand to grab onto his fingertips. If he really jumped off this cliff, he would probably die without a doubt. No Trace of Snow's fingers tightened. He raised his head, blood dripping from the corner of his lips. His chest was already a shocking bright red. There was a strange expression on his face. His black eyes were shining with a hint of hope. It seemed strange, but it also seemed like he was hesitating. Her hands were actually very weak. After all, she did not have any martial arts skills. She had the skills of an ordinary person. Grabbing onto him for a few seconds was already the limit. No Trace of Snow did not struggle, nor did he use any strength. It was clearly very easy for him to go up. However, he allowed her to use all her strength to save him. Wei Wei Bai's indifference shattered. She gritted her teeth and almost screamed, No Trace of Snow, you bastard. If you want to die, you can only die in my hands. Who allowed you to commit suicide? Her eyes were filled with twisted pain and despair. The sarcasm and the smug look on her face just now that she had stabbed him in the heart had disappeared. Her fingers were trembling too much. Her body was constantly being dragged down by his weight. He was not helping her. She would be dragged down the cliff with him. No Trace of Snow did not seem to understand what she was doing. His voice was even calm. Aren't you playing with me? She repeatedly stabbed him in the chest. What was she going to do this time? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, and her eyes were filled with tears. Her throat was trembling, and her voice was hoarse. I'm just toying with you. I've been toying with you since the beginning. I don't love you. No Trace of Snow, I won't love you. So wake up. I beg you to stop being emotional. The pain of weeping blood. It was a sadness that seeped into his bones. She was still forcing a mocking smile. I hate you to death, so you're not allowed to die. These words were simply a complete reversal of what he was talking about. However, she said it as if it was a matter of course. She was unreasonable, but Xue Wuhan didn't dare to believe it. He suddenly flung himself, and his entire body fell down. Her shocked and despairing face appeared in his black pupils. At this moment, No Trace of Snow could even be said to be delighted. Regardless of whether it was fake or not, when she was sad, he could finally tell himself that she had him in her heart. He didn't dare to trust his own judgment. He didn't dare to believe that the despair in her eyes was real. But in the next moment, his pupils suddenly shrank. Wei Wei Bai was actually resolute. Without any hesitation, she jumped down from the cliff. Her skirt fluttered like a flower in the wind. She pulled open her belt and used all her strength, which had no internal energy, to straighten her belt. She wrapped it around his wrist, but the wind was too strong. She didn't have the strength to really tie him up. The belt loosened in an instant. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. She looked at him helplessly. Her lips trembled as she silently called out, Master. No Trace of Snow's mind was blank. No one would be willing to live and die together for a game, for a lie. She said that he had a secret method to bring the dead back to life. But the cliff was so high. If she fell down, her bones and flesh would probably be separated from her body. In this world, There couldn't be a method to bring a person back to life after their bones were crushed. / for the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button, comma. Chapter 1337. Rather than saying that she came back from the dead, she was actually faking her death. This was the most logical explanation. In this jump, it was impossible for her to fake her death. So, did she love him? No trace of Snow only felt the blood in his mouth, so astringent that it was disgusting. He saw that her belt was about to fall off. His fingers finally moved, and then he quickly reached out. Strength surged out from his fingertips as he suddenly grabbed her belt and pulled hard. A huge amount of inner strength broke through the wind and pulled her body down. Her entire body was in the whistling wind as she was pulled into his embrace. Her skin was cold from the wind, and her body was also stiff, but he felt that her body was unbelievably beautiful. His lips were close to her ear, and the smell of blood stained her hair. What do you want me to do? Wasn't it good that he was dead? He wouldn't pester her anymore. Shouldn't she hate him to death? No trace of Snow laughed at himself, but his tone carried a desperate madness. Is it because of the goo worm? But if I die, the goo worm will also die, so you'll be free. Wei Bai trembled, but she didn't have the ability to make a sound like him. Because the speed was too fast and the wind was too fast, she was pulled into his embrace, buried in his chest, and couldn't even raise her head. No trace of Snow saw that her whole body was trembling, unable to resist the cold wind. His eyes finally softened, and he sighed softly. He reached out and pressed her head, stroking her hair, and lowered his head to cherish and kiss her hair. If I don't die, you won't be free. After saying this, his body suddenly changed, and with the peak of Qigong, he walked on the wind. Although the backlash of this martial art was fatal, but the inner strength and martial arts that were exchanged with one's life were the best in the world. He had never been defeated by anyone, only he wanted to die. Otherwise, no difficulty would be enough to make him fall into a fatal situation. No trace of Snow's silver hair fluttered in the wind as he carried her. He stepped on a protruding rock and leaped up as light as a swallow. In front of his vigorous inner energy, the cliff rocks were like a steady flight of stairs. He hugged her and jumped back to the top of the mountain. The night was cold and the moonlight was clear. Wei Bai was held in his arms, trembling nonstop. She was still afraid of death. She didn't even dare to raise her head. She could only grab onto his clothes tightly and bury her head in his chest. She was like an ostrich that refused to look outside. No trace of Snow heard her muffled and desperate whisper. How can you die? I won't allow you to die, Master. He stood there in a daze and hugged her even more tightly. She might have been scared out of her wits and didn't even know that she was saved. She was scared out of her wits. Where was the arrogant, domineering, vicious, and cunning look from before? Under the moonlight, no trace of Snow was shrouded in the moonlight. His blood-stained face was a little dazed. He had lost his usual calmness, and there was a hint of longing in his eyes. He didn't dare to believe her, but the thing she did forced him to believe her. His heart was empty. It was filled with hate, doubt, love, and bitter happiness that he shouldn't have. No trace of Snow moved his lips, but in the end, he couldn't speak. He didn't even want her to come back to her senses. He made her curl up in his arms and tremble nonstop. She wasn't going anywhere. No trace of Snow hugged her, lowered his head, and kissed the top of her head. His expression was tender and loving. The pain in his chest, the blood that was gushing up, and her trembling. All of these made him feel incomparably calm. She was afraid that he would die, so she deliberately provoked him, hated him, and didn't want to be with him. Or did she really hate him and just pretend to be affectionate for the sake of playing a game? He didn't care at the moment. He just wanted to hold her for a while longer, enjoy this short period of time before his death. It was a rare moment of warmth. / save button, comma. Chapter 1338. Wei Bai's spirit was dispirited and her body was exhausted. After returning, no trace of Snow had been tormenting her for a few days. This guy thought that he was going to die in a few days. That was why he was so clingy to her. In addition, he jumped off the cliff and thought of all kinds of follow-up plans. She realized that not only was her kidney deficient, but her body was probably going to be crippled. Wei Wei Bai shouted, "Tongzi, I'm so tired." System. Wei Wei Bai then remembered that the system was blocked. Because of their shameless life, the system was surrounded by bullet screens for a long time. Wei Wei Bai sighed that this strategy was not something that humans could do. Those who could do it were not humans. She climbed up from the bed, and the blanket slid off her shoulders, revealing her slender and fair back. She lazily raised her hand to remove the white veil. However, a hand gently held her hand and pulled her back. No trace of Snow's tightly shut eyes slowly opened. They were incomparably clear, but the redness at the corners of his eyes carried a trace of bone-chilling evilness. He buried his face in her hair and said softly, "Are you hungry?" Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened and her lips curled into a sneer. "Didn't you feed me?" No trace of Snow was not surprised by her bold words. He got up and wrapped her in the blanket. Then, he got off the bed naked and casually put on his robe. His strong and beautiful back and the smooth lines of his muscles were so perfect that it was dazzling. After he casually put on his clothes, he walked out. Wei Wei Bai saw that he had left and wrapped herself tightly in the blanket. Then, she called the system. "Tongzi, how is no trace of Snow's body condition?" The system finally crawled out from the barrage of comments. It was on its last breath. "He's going to die. His body has suffered a terrible backlash. The deeper his emotions are, the faster his death will be. His favorability is too high. The reason he can hold on until now is because his physical fitness is top-notch." Wei Wei Bai asked, "How long can you last?" The system replied, "About half a month, but with your blood, he can hold on for a long time." Her blood was not the real antidote, but suppressing no trace of Snow's emotional pain was still possible. Wei Wei Bai, "Looks like we can only increase our favorability." Originally, it was 99. He wanted to work harder to get it to 100. After all, she could farm in one plane for the rest of her life. To her, it was like a vacation. The main system said that he had to earn 100 heartbreak points to get this reward. She also knew that the side mission of this plane was this heart-wrenching mission. Furthermore, there was no punishment for this side mission. Wei Wei Bai knew that it was because the punishment of this side mission was linked to the next mission. If she filled it up, the side mission would be completed, and the next mission would reward her with a lifetime of time to explore the next plane. If she did not fill it up, the consequence of failure would be, was it because the time to explore the next plane might be very short? Wei Wei Bai did not ask the system, but she vaguely knew. There were many things that should not be said, but it told her everything. Wei Wei Bai was also afraid that she would cause too much of a burden to the system. The system hid many things from her. Could it not say that it was because of the system's rules? Wei Wei Bai hid the deep thoughts in her eyes and suddenly said softly, "Tongzi." The system, "What's wrong?" Wei Wei Bai, "Nothing, I'm calling you." The system, then it silently swallowed the rest of the sausage, afraid that the host would know that it ate expired food again. When no trace of Snow returned, he saw Wei Wei Bai staring at the white veil with a confused expression, without the sharp gaze that she usually had when she was awake. At https://www.sashu.com/ Full text at https://www.sashu.com// Download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click save below to record this reading record. Chapter 1339. He stood silently by the side for a while, staring at her silently. When she turned her head warily, he walked over and put a cup to her lips. She wanted to avoid it, but he had already pressed down on the back of her head, forcing her to raise her neck and drink the liquid in the cup. Wei Wei Bai frowned and slammed the cup in his hand. What did you make me drink this time? No trace of snow. No trace of snow pursed his lips and did not speak. The things she had been drinking recently were all from the Shui family's treasure vault. They had been hidden for many years and were almost unwilling to give it to outsiders. Wine was not intoxicating, it was more like clear water. However, its effects were amazing. It could open the meridians and mold the bones. Originally, when a person reached a certain age, their bones would be fixed, and it was almost impossible to learn martial arts. Even if one was talented and mastered it, they would not be able to become an expert. Wei Wei Bai definitely could not practice martial arts at her age. But if he died, who could protect her? She was too attractive. Which man did not want to have her when they saw her? If she did not have martial arts, there would be a day sooner or later. Like now, she would be locked up by another man. Just like what he did. When a man became a beast, there was basically nothing that he could not do. No trace of snow wanted to take her with him. But after jumping off a cliff, he found that he could be so soft-hearted toward the woman. She was willing to jump down to accompany him once. He was actually satisfied. No trace of Snow's fingers gently touched her lips that were stained with wine and said indifferently, "I won't poison you to death." Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely and suddenly turned around, not wanting to look at him. No trace of Snow looked at her capricious appearance helplessly. She seemed to be angry. No trace of Snow lowered his eyes, his eyelashes drooping, a burning emotion surging in the depths of his eyes. He reached out his slender fingers and gently stroked her long hair. Then, without any hesitation, he said, without hesitation, he carried her up with the blanket. Wei Wei Bai had no room to refuse and was taken out by him. No trace of Snow took her to see the flowers. The place where he had locked her up was the Shui clan's headquarters in the back mountains. Very few people could enter this place, especially after he killed someone and ruined his reputation. This place became even more desolate. Walking across the lonely stone bridge, he put her on the swing. Wei Wei Bai looked at the sky, full of flowers. No trace of snow. This is the sea of flowers in the backyard. They were planted in the past, but no one took care of them, so they bloomed like this. The soil here was fertile, and once the seeds of flowers entered the soil, they would wantonly grow like this. When Wei Wei Bai saw that it was outside, a trace of anger and embarrassment flashed across her face. "Can't you let me put on some clothes?" Ever since she jumped off the cliff, this guy didn't even give her a single piece of clothing. No trace of Snow smiled. "I'm not giving it to you because I'm afraid you'll run away." Wei Wei Bai snorted. "You have so much confidence in me. With you here, where can I run to?" With his martial arts skills, not to mention her, even if it was a nest of ants, he could catch all of them in one go. Not a single one could escape. Having high martial arts skills was a super cheat. Hearing, smell, and vigilance. It was simply frightening. When her breathing changed, he could immediately tell if she was awake or pretending to be asleep. Sometimes, when she wanted to lie to him, she had to weigh her own abilities and give up in the end. It wasn't that her acting skills were bad. It was that she couldn't fake the sound of her heartbeat and her constant breathing while sleeping. No matter how much she pretended to be, it was useless. No trace of Snow looked at her deeply, but didn't answer. In his current state, his body could collapse at any time. He was afraid that if he suddenly collapsed, she would leave without even looking at him. Chapter 1340. At least she had to wear clothes to buy some time. Once he recovered, he would still be able to catch her. Before he died, no matter how miserable he was, he would not let go. This was his last bit of kindness. After all, he even had the selfish thought of dragging her to his death. No trace of Snow did not say anything else. He silently pulled out a long sword, then slowly walked towards the flower field. Wei Wei Bai wrapped herself in the blanket like a cocoon and looked at him. But she realized that the path no trace of Snow walked, the flowers were all broken. The petals flew up, the petals that filled the sky, and the ground flew away with his steps. Flowers, one by one, were crushed and scattered by his power, and these petals turned into a rain of flowers. It was as beautiful as a fairyland. The most beautiful was still the man standing in the middle of the rain of flowers. His white robe and silver hair fluttered in the wind. When he turned around, his long sword was already in his hand. A beautiful sword dance began to dance in the midst of the petals. The sword dance was cold and fierce, but very beautiful. It had the strength of a man, but was as light as a flower. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. No trace of snow is going to become a deity. The system looked. His family seems to have a tradition. Wei Wei Bai, what tradition? The system, it's a sword dance for his wife, and it's an ancestral sword dance. Every move of the sword dance has its own rules. Each move has a different meaning. Wei Wei Bai was curious. What do they mean? The system immediately started the live broadcast. He stepped on the petals and turned them into a rain of petals. It means that you're as beautiful as a flower and intoxicating. He started the first move. The first move means that he fell in love with you at first sight. The second move means that the sword moves with the person. It means that he tosses and turns in bed for you, seeking you all the time. The third move means that he gets what he desires and is overjoyed. The fourth move means that he loves you as his own, holding your hand for life. At this point, the system suddenly stopped. No trace of snow withdrew the last move of the fourth sword form. His figure paused, and an unsuppressible burning heat slowly appeared on his face that was as calm as ice. Then, he began to use the fifth sword form. The system replied, "Usually once the fourth sword form is over, it's over. No one from the Shuef family knows how to perform the fifth sword form." Wei Wei Bai looked at no trace of snow standing in the flower field. His otherworldly temperament made the petals in the sky lose their color. He was the only one who stunned everyone. Then he looked back at her with a faint smile in his eyes. That smile came from the bottom of his heart, without a trace of his usual hypocritical pretense. Wei Wei Bai blushed, and then she lowered her eyelashes as if she couldn't bear his smile. No trace of snow slowly began to perform the last sword move of the Snow family's sword dance manual. This sword manual was very old. Almost no one would jump for the final sword strike. Because the Shuef family liked the promise of this life and did not think about the uncertain and hopeless next life. The meaning of the last sword form was to make a promise in the next life. This sword form was sincere and did not have any fierce power, but it carried a humble begging. Such a humble request was not what the Shuef family liked. They would rather not have the next life than ask for anything in this world. Who would have thought that he would jump for the last sword form? Seeing the trace of infatuation and surprise in Wei Wei Bai's eyes, he knew that she did not understand this, and simply thought that it looked good. No trace of snow revealed a smile. After he finished his sword dance, he withdrew the last sword form and hid all of his humble begging. He begged her to make a promise with him in the next life. He knew that it was a childish and foolish idea, but he still did it. For the https://www.sashu.com/ for the full text. https://www.sashu.com for the txt for the /t. Chapter 1341. Fortunately, she didn't understand his childish thoughts, or else she would look down on him again. No trace of snow kept his sword and walked towards her. Suddenly, he staggered and his vision turned black. A pain with the smell of blood attacked his body. He couldn't take it anymore and suddenly stabbed his sword into the ground. He knelt on one knee and spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood dyed the petals red. He had difficulty breathing and couldn't stand up. Wei Wei Bai had already gotten off the swing. She called out to him strangely, "No trace of snow?" No trace of snow's eyelashes trembled as he looked at her with unfocused eyes. His beautiful eyes were actually numb. He wanted to hold on to his last bit of consciousness, wanted to see if she was still there, or if she had escaped. She always liked to do this. After escaping, she came back to tease him. Then she would escape again. He originally thought that he was a scumbag and fickle enough. In the end, after meeting her, he knew what it meant to be temperamental. She said she loved him and said she didn't love him. After saying she didn't love him, she came to save him. This was the first time he had been put in such a difficult position by a woman. He was even neurotic and paranoid. She walked closer to him and hesitantly called out, "Master." No trace of snow suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. He wanted to seal her acupuncture points so that she couldn't move. But a thought made him hesitate. If he died like this, wouldn't it be better to let her go? He didn't want her to see him die. With this hesitation, she had already struggled to break free from his hand. No trace of Snow's weak fingers were flung away by her. His unfocused pupils constricted and his expression turned sinister. She was going to escape. No trace of Snow coughed out a few mouthfuls of blood. He wanted to stand up, but he fell directly to the ground. The sword in his hand fell to the ground. He lay on the ground, spitting out blood without any regard for his life. The backlash was too strong. His meridians couldn't withstand such a violent and terrifying attack. His silver hair scattered down, also stained with blood. Shui Wuhan raised his eyes. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai had already turned around and ran away, she dragged the blanket and ran forward barefooted. The sound of the bell gradually faded away. No trace of Snow's vision began to be eroded by the darkness, but his hand was still reaching forward helplessly. He wanted to grab her. He wouldn't let her run away. No trace of Snow's eyes lost their light, and his eyelids couldn't hold on any longer. Finally, he sighed. His fingers finally fell to the ground in despair. He couldn't keep her. No trace of Snow never thought that before he died, he would be so unwilling to let her go. In the future, he would not exist in her life. Just as he was about to give up and completely sink into the darkness, his fingers were suddenly held by someone, and he felt a little wet and warm. It was as if her palms were sweaty. No trace of Snow's half-closed eyes trembled. In a daze, he saw Wei Wei Bai's anxious expression appear. Her face was very red, as if she had run too fast. So her forehead was also covered in sweat. His weak fingers flexed, wanting to grab her fingers. This was his last consciousness, and then he completely fainted. This sleep was very long, and he thought that he wouldn't wake up. The tip of his nose was filled with the smell of blood. No trace of Snow frowned. His eyelids moved, and he finally opened his eyes. Then he saw himself lying on the bed, and the white gauze was tied up. He heard the sound of something winding. He turned to look, only to see a thin figure sitting on a chair. The long bandage on the table was spread out, and she was wrapping the bandage around her wrist. The sunlight shone in, and her shadow was beautiful and illusory. There was a strong smell of blood in the air. No trace of Snow at first thought that he had vomited blood, but suddenly he felt that something was wrong. The pain in his chest that had always been there was gone. His broken meridians were not a big problem. No trace of Snow raised his hand and looked strangely at the palm lines on his palm. He found that everything was fine. His power was also there, and his body showed no signs of collapsing. No trace of Snow suddenly woke up, and he jumped up from the bed. Wei Wei Bai was shocked and quickly hid her hands in her sleeves. Without thinking, she got up and ran out. No trace of Snow was extremely fast, and before her hand touched the door, he had already appeared in front of it. She directly crashed into his arms. No trace of Snow held his breath. The smell of blood on her body was too strong. He glanced at the table, which was full of medicine bottles and blood-stained gauze. No trace of Snow's eyelids trembled. His eyes were sharp and cold with anger. "What did you use to save me?" His voice was trembling. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Her face was unusually pale. She raised her eyebrows and laughed disdainfully. "Who saved you? It's best if you die." No trace of Snow's chest was crushed by something, and there was a shattering pain. He held her hand, not allowing her to refuse, and raised it up. His sleeves fell to her elbows. On her wrist, there was a blood-stained bandage, and blood was oozing out uncontrollably. No trace of Snow used his inner strength, and the bandage broke. A deep wound appeared on her wrist, and the bone was visible. It was not just one wound, but one wound after another, almost to the bone. Her meridians were broken. Her hand was completely crippled. No trace of Snow stared blankly at her hand. He had tried his best to reconstruct her muscles and bones, but she destroyed herself. Chapter 1342. His fingers couldn't help but exert more strength, bit by bit, as if he wanted to break her wrist. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Her eyes flashed with pain, but she didn't make a sound. No trace of Snow's expression turned sinister. He clenched his teeth, as if he wanted to eat her up. He saw that the blood on her wrist kept flowing down. He lowered his head and sucked on the cold blood. Extreme body was the only thing that suppressed his martial arts. The first time they met, he wanted to kill her. At that time, he saw the flower on her shoulder and knew about her body constitution, so he let her go. But now, he hated the thing that let her go. He tried his best to adjust her body so that her meridians could perfectly withstand his inner strength. She crippled half of it. Before he died, he would forcefully inject all of his inner strength into her body. His inner strength was the inner strength of his swordsmanship. He had to rely on his hands. Crippling his hands was equivalent to crippling half of his martial arts. He really wanted to just take her away so that he wouldn't be so worrisome. He wouldn't be able to die in peace. His eyes were sinister red, his face was like white jade, and his messy silver hair was like a waterfall. His entire being was filled with a cold sense of despair. Wei Wei Bai felt the wound on her wrist. It was so painful that she couldn't bear it. He sucked so hard that he wanted to bite off her hand. Her cowering tremble was detected by him. No trace of Snow's breathing became more chaotic. He finally let go of her hand and pulled her to the side of the table expressionlessly. He personally mixed the medicine, applied it, and wrapped the bandages around her. The process was oppressive and meticulous. He lowered his eyes. His eyes were extremely cold. His love was too deep. Hatred was also growing. She could always let him see hope in his despair. But this hope was better not to have it. The most painful thing for a person was not complete despair. It was uncertain hope. It was even the hope of deception. Wei Wei Bai's erratic feelings were almost unbearable for him. No trace of Snow saw the scattered medicines on the table, as well as the blood-stained medicine jar. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Do you think you can save me like this?" Although her blood could alleviate the pain in his body, he was too deeply in love, and she did not have the ability to suppress his power. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly. "Can't you not love me?" Her voice was flat, rigid, and filled with suppressed anger. No trace of Snow looked up. In his deep eyes, it was as if a stone had been thrown into a lake, causing a few ripples. No, he was indifferent but firm. He even smiled. The blood at the corner of his lips was beautiful and strange. Wei Wei Bai's face immediately turned pale. The cold determination in her eyes shattered, and an extremely sorrowful expression appeared on her face. Her crippled hand weakly clutched at his sleeve. "No trace of Snow. I hate you," she said sorrowfully and helplessly. She could no longer maintain her previous emotionlessness. Even the infatuation that she had hidden was revealed. Her eyes were filled with desolation and fragility. "I've done so many things to make you angry. Why can't you do what you did before and pierce my heart with a sword and live on?" When she said that her heart was pierced by a sword, there was not the slightest bit of hatred. There was only anger that was filled with resentment. No trace of Snow's lips moved. A lot of words were stuck in his throat, but he did not know what to say. She was lying to him, or did she really love him? No trace of Snow looked at her blankly for a while. Suddenly, he reached out and touched her face, feeling the despair and pain in her trembling body. And Chapter 1343. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to cling on to him. She was afraid that he would die, so she needed more warmth to fill the fear in her heart. No trace of Snow paused for a moment, but in the end, he let himself be seduced by her. He pulled her completely into the beautiful intertwining. The system was speechless. "Fuck your second brother. Is it going to spend the rest of its life with the bullet screen?" The days passed in Wei Wei Bai, and no trace of Snow's shameless bullet screen life. The system finally found the time to remind her, "Wake up, dog couple, no host, it's time." Wei Wei Bai was in a daze with the book in her hands, and only reacted when she heard the system's words. "What's the favorability now?" The system blurted out 90. "Bullshit, I can't say." Wei Wei Bai also came back to her senses. She did not want to ask. It was just a reflex. She thought for a while, then said, I don't understand many of these books. No Trace of Snow's nod is really stubborn. The system said, You really want to save No Trace of Snow? Wei Wei Bai said, It's just an act. Isn't it to get favorability? The system, You're too good at acting. I've cried so many times. I'm always out of tune with the host because I'm not perverted enough. Wei Wei Bai said, But if you want to act like it, you have to act like it, slacking off so much. Oh, I mean, you've been reading the books for so many days. Even if you can't save him, you have to at least say something. Otherwise, everyone would know that she did not read the books. Wouldn't she fail to act cool? The system said, So, what do you mean? Wei Wei Bai said without much care. Can you spend a day's worth of life points to buy me a summary of the books that can deceive people? The system. So the host has been reading so many books, it's all an act? You can't even recite the summary of the books. Did you use all your time to daydream? She wanted No Trace of Snow dead. She did not want to save him at all. A scammer who cheated others of their favorable impression points. The system spat in its heart and wiped away its tears of abuse. In the future, if it still believed in the cheap acting skills of its host, it would follow her surname. The system glanced at the discounted goods. There's a low-level version of a luck booster that gives you 2 days of HP. It's a one-time use type. You just have to throw it, and it will pick out a book that suits you best. Wei Wei Bai's heart ached for his 2 days of life, but to show off, he still bought it. After all, it took a lot of effort to fool No Trace of Snow. After being lazy for so many days, if she couldn't come up with a summary of the secret manual, it would be strange if No Trace of Snow didn't suspect her. After the system gave Wei Wei by the beginner one-time lucky booster that had been eliminated, it said, Make a wish and I'll throw it away. Wei Wei Bai said casually, I'll choose the secret manual that can completely cure No Trace of Snow's dead knot. There was a mountain of secret manuals. Most of them were books that had nothing to do with No Trace of Snow's martial arts. So Wei Wei Bai's purpose was to choose the book related to the dead knot and then read a few pages. When she was chatting with No Trace of Snow, she could also say a few words to make him believe that she was not slacking off, but was trembling with fear as she read the books to find a way to save him. As for why she made such a big wish, she said that it was a wish. Of course, she had a wish for the best. Just as she finished speaking, a small dot of light appeared in the air. Only Wei Wei Bai and the system could see the dot of light. The dot of light, which was as small as a firefly, flew around the mountain of ancient books and suddenly landed on an inconspicuous thin book with a blue cover. This was the book that was at the bottom of the pile. Wei Wei Bai did not have a chance to flip through it at all. She casually pulled it out and flipped it open. She was stunned for a moment before continuing to flip through it. The book was very thin, but it was not difficult either. It was just that it was hidden too deep, and not many people thought of reading it. So it was missed for many years. After she finished reading it, she sighed. These 2 days of life points were really worth it. It was the system's first time hearing the host say that it was worth it. Once she spent her life points, she felt that it was not worth it no matter how valuable the function was. Was it worth more than her life points? Then it heard her say, I found a way to solve No Trace of Snow's dead knot. The system, what? What the hell? How did you find it? A dead knot that was 3 times harder to solve. How could it be solved so easily? Wei Wei Bai burned the book and clapped her hands. All right, let's go torture No Trace of Snow. The system, what? Host, wake up. Your affinity is not full yet. No Trace of Snow is going to be tortured silly by you. The Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here, / the Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here, / Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1344. No Trace of Snow carried a wooden food box. He seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, 1 step was like 10 steps forward. He had recently begun to study how to connect Wei Wei Bai's meridians. Every time he saw the wound on her wrist and the scar on her chest, it was like 2 fatal swords stabbing into his chest, causing him to be restless day and night. No trace of Snow walked into the house and found that the house was full of books, scattered and thrown messily. But that familiar figure was not there. He put the food box on the table, and his figure floated up. In an instant, he had walked through the entire house and the nearby places. But no, there was no familiar sound of the bell. There was also no sign of her. No trace of Snow frowned slightly. Where did she go? During this period of time, she had almost never left this place. Even if she did, she would look for secret manuals and ancient books. No trace of Snow felt a faint uneasiness in his heart, but he forced himself to suppress it. Then, he walked toward the library. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and walked to the table in the blink of an eye. He saw an inconspicuous piece of paper between an ancient book. No trace of Snow opened the book and saw Wei Wei Bai's handwriting on the paper. He touched the beautiful handwriting with his fingers because he was too excited. Wei Wei Bai's handwriting was a little messy. Master, I found a way to save you. Then there was an address. No trace of Snow was stunned, and then smiled helplessly. What kind of method made her so excited? She said several times that she would find a way to save him, but she never succeeded. He played along with her whims. Anyway, it was fine as long as she was happy. No trace of Snow picked up the food box, which contained the red bean and lotus seed soup that he had made himself. Recently, she had been talking about eating sweet things. He was afraid that she would have a bad appetite, so he did not let her eat anything too sweet. Today, he was in a bad mood, so he made a bowl for her. The place was not far away. It was the place where the sword was forged. The furnace was always sealed here. After all, a good sword took a long time to forge. And after it was forged, the furnace would not be opened again for a long time. He walked in and saw that the fire was on. She was sitting not far from the furnace. Her black hair was tied up, and the red ribbon was very bright in the black hair. Wei Wei Bai muttered to herself, "Of fire." Shui Wuhan silently appeared behind her. "What do you mean by not enough?" Bai Wei Wei was startled. When she turned her head and saw that it was him, her eyes held a smile. "You are here, master." Shui Wuhan followed her example and squatted down. Her white robe overlapped with her beautiful skirt. "What good method did you see again? Do you want to test it?" She had always been willful and reckless. Those methods of saving people were also unique and peculiar. Bai Wei Wei touched her face. "Use your furnace to refine some medicine." No trace of Snow looked behind the furnace. The flames were burning fiercely in the furnace. He was in a trance. "I remember when I was young, I saw my first sword being born in this furnace. All the swords in the Shui family came from this furnace." Wei Wei Bai was a little curious. Her dark eyes were filled with pure curiosity. "What was Master like when you were young?" No trace of Snow casually supported his chin with one hand. "When I was young, I was very naughty." Wei Wei Bai was a little doubtful. "Very naughty?" No trace of Snow. "I liked to play pranks. Then I would pretend to be a good person to comfort others. Then I would stab them when they were not on guard. I like this kind of game very much." / Chapter 1345. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "What a strange way of being naughty." The system said, "Can you be more direct? What a wicked way of being naughty." It was not growing up but becoming a pervert. It was the pervert who grew up. No trace of Snow recalled his past calmly. "I know I'm different from others. Maybe it was this martial art that drove me crazy." The Shui family, from the first generation to the present, almost all of them stood at the top of the martial arts world and never came down, because their martial arts were too heaven-defying. There was no secret technique that could surpass this martial art that did not allow one to fall in love. The more heaven-defying it was, the more undefeatable it was, the more fatal the flaw was. Not being able to fall in love would kill, and it would cause one to go crazy. Maybe it was because of the curse, but every man who inherited this martial art knew the taboo of not being able to fall in love. But none of them could escape the cage of love. Once they fell in love, it was almost irreversible until they went crazy and died. This was also the reason why the Shui family was dying. In his generation, his father went crazy and died because of love, and his mother committed suicide. He was the only direct heir left in his family. He thought he could escape the curse of being in love. He knew that he had a cold heart when he was young. Forget about love. He would not even be moved by family or friendship. No trace of Snow looked at her and found that she was looking at him with both hands holding her chin and smiling. She seemed to be very interested in his past. No trace of Snow did not like to recall the past, and there was nothing to remember. But seeing that she was interested, he began to talk about his past. I learned this martial art on my own accord because I knew that once I mastered it, I would be the best in the world. Being the best in the world was still very tempting to him when he was young. After all, he liked to play pranks and watch people go crazy and die. Only with invincible martial arts could he perfectly maintain this hobby. After I mastered it, even if I wanted to give up this martial art, I couldn't. Now, I'm basically in a state of waiting for death. Just like now, he was so deeply in love that he had no idea how to cripple his martial arts. Wei Wei Bai gently leaned her head on his shoulder and smiled cutely. No, I will save you. No trace of Snow heard her words, and his mood improved. He looked down at her, but only saw her snow-white side face. Under the illumination of the fire, there was a kind of bright and enchanting beauty that made people's hearts flutter. She suddenly said softly, "When I was young, I was very lively too." No trace of Snow. How lively! When you like someone, you can't help but want to know everything about that person. Wei Wei Bai, I know I'm very pretty, and everyone likes me. So, I like to make those who like me suffer. Was this scum reminiscing about the past? One pushed a person into hell. One likes the pain of others. They were born to be a pair of trash. The system silently distanced itself from this pair of trash lovers. No trace of Snow smiled carelessly. It's a very good hobby. This way, no one will be able to get you. Wei Wei Bai smiled happily. Of course, do you know what I like to do the most? Once I'm sure that a man likes me, I will pretend to like him too. Those fools are so cute, they will believe whatever I say. My most amazing part is that when I cry, men will believe anything I say. No trace of Snow's smile disappeared, and he replied faintly, "When you cry, even if they don't believe it, they can't bear to." Chapter 1346. When she cried, it was even more painful than when he was aroused. Wei Wei Bai didn't care and said, "You're still a fool. I'm not interested in these fools who really like me. When I was young, my biggest dream was—" No trace of Snow heard her pause, as if hesitating to say it. She whispered to herself, "If I say it, you'll laugh at me for being a lunatic." No trace of Snow's eyes darkened and said indifferently, "I'm already a lunatic. If you're a lunatic, we'll be a pair." Wei Wei Bai immediately laughed. "Then I'll say it. My dream since I was young was to have a beautiful love." She was indeed a fool, but she wasn't a lunatic. Before No Trace of Snow could breathe a sigh of relief, her soft voice whispered into his ear. Her soft and gentle voice rang in his ears, then teared apart. No Trace of Snow was stunned. Her breath was already far away. Then he realized that his body had softened and his martial arts had been sealed. No Trace of Snow was still sitting, but he looked at her with a complicated expression. Wei Wei Bai got up, her skirt swaying. Her cute appearance had changed. She came to the stove and looked at it seriously, then threw something in. A rich fragrance began to fill the whole room. "You know that I'm the successor of the Saintess, right? My mother told me since I was young that when we Saintesses want to succeed, we need to sacrifice a man's pure love." Wei Wei Bai flirtatiously pulled at her skirt, revealing the bell on her ankle. She turned around, lifted her delicate toes, and used the heel of her foot to press against his limp lower jaw. Then she gently lifted his face with her foot. This action was like a master treating a slave, high and mighty. No Trace of Snow was expressionless. There was no trace of hatred or anger in his eyes. Instead, it was peaceful and could even be called gentle. He seemed to think that she was playing a prank again. Wei Wei Bai saw him like this and couldn't help but laugh. "You've really fallen in love with me. My mother told me that, of course, this ceremony is very difficult, so no saintess can do it. Because of the pure love, no matter how charming you are, no man can really give it to you." Her posture was flirtatious. When she lifted her foot, her skirt flowed like a flower. When no trace of snow looked down, he saw the bell on her ankle. It was cute and sexy. Her every move was filled with natural charm. Like a demon, she was getting better at using her assets. Bai Weiwei released her foot and lightly held his face in her hands. Your martial arts were sealed. How pitiful. Do you hate me? Shui Wuhan silently used his internal energy to attack his sealed meridians. It wasn't that he couldn't break through, he just needed time. He smiled. Weiwei, I can't hate you. She was always capricious, but he knew that she was definitely thinking of ways to make him hate her. Falling in love was a knot in his heart. As long as he stopped loving, the knot would be untied. She kept tormenting him, saying that she loved him, and saying that she hated him. Wasn't it just to make him stop loving her? To save his life? She had said that there was a way to save him, and this was the only way he could think of. Therefore, he knew that she was in complete despair. There was definitely no way to save him in the secret manual. So she went back to her old ways and told him not to fall in love. Perhaps it really was a curse. He looked at her beautiful face and thought that her cheeks were flushed like peach blossoms. The men of the Shui family couldn't escape the knot in their lives. He would always die for a woman. His voice became gentle. When I see you, I always feel that dying is worth it. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. / crossover system, Adonis, come here. / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here. Mobile crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 1347. Weiwei Bai was not moved at all. She looked at him coldly. Do you really love me that much? No trace of snow was not pretentious. When I love you, aren't you very happy? He was talking about when they were in bed. Weiwei Bai seemed to have thought of those as well. She touched his face longingly and then sighed. That's true. The man I find in the future will not be as good as you. It will be troublesome. No trace of Snow's pupils shrank and his smile turned cold. In the future, don't talk about finding a man. He was petty and did not allow her to think about the future so easily. He could not see it after he died, but now he could not tolerate her thinking about other men. Weiwei Bai did not care about his anger. She pulled out his sword and looked down at the sharp blade. Okay, I won't talk about it. After all, you're the first man I truly love, so I have to treat you better. After saying that, she cut open his wrist with the sword in her hand. The meridians in his wrist were cut. No trace of Snow saw blood spurting out from his wrist and splashing onto the ground. Weiwei Bai took a few steps back, but the back of her foot was still splashed with blood. It was beautiful and flirtatious. She looked at it faintly, as if she was a little disgusted, but her emotions were very calm. It was as if she was looking at an insignificant little thing. And that was his blood. No trace of Snow laid on the ground powerlessly. His internal energy began to rush through his meridians. He was just a little bit away from success. But for some reason, he suddenly stopped. He let himself lie on the ground and listened to the sound of the fire burning. He looked at her extremely indifferent eyes. It was not that she did not have any emotions. It was not like before when she pretended to not love him. It was not that successful. When she pretended not to love him, there would always be traces of love and hate mixed with pain. Right now, she was gorgeous, but her expression was too cold and casual. Instead, there was a trace of coldness and holiness. It could even be said that she was feeling real. Weiwei Bai was indeed feeling real. She looked at him indifferently. His heart was neither sad nor happy, neither disgusted nor amazed. Her isolated feelings never had the chance to enter her heart. No trace of Snow's silver hair draped over the ground. Red blood seeped out from his snow-white wrist. His white robe, silver hair, and red blood. There was a kind of extreme, morbid beauty that made people feel suffocated. But this kind of beauty couldn't leave a trace in her calm and hard heart. The system suddenly said softly, Weiwei. Weiwei Bai's heart trembled. She rarely heard the system call her name. The system replied, Nothing, just calling you. It knew that the emotional shielding function was so powerful that it could create a dream isolation for Yi Yuxuan. It was even more impossible for Wei Wei Bai to escape from this powerful shielding ability. That was why it was suddenly afraid just now. She had blocked out all her feelings. Fortunately, she still treated it the same as before. Emotions couldn't block reality. The system knew that it was her only connection to reality. So, in this plane, she would only have feelings for it. It raised its head and looked at the shielding device. Then it fell silent. This emotionless state was the most perfect because this way, she wouldn't be in pain and break down. As for whether or not Yi Yuxuan would break down in pain, it was Wei Wei Bai's system. It didn't care whether Yi Yuxuan lived or died. It was fine as long as Wei Wei Bai lived. Wei Wei Bai didn't think as much as the system. She wanted no trace of Snow to believe that she didn't have feelings for him. Chapter 1348. She directly exposed the fact that she really had no feelings for him. Unlike before, when she said that she had no feelings and hated him to death. In fact, all kinds of subtle expressions made no trace of Snow suspect that she was lying. She lazily shook her ankle, and the sound of the bell had a clear and cold feeling. The long sword in her hand gently rested on no trace of Snow's left wrist. She was cold and casual. "Master, I'm afraid that you'll break through the limits of the poison, so I'll cripple you first." Her words did not have any emotional fluctuations. It was as if she had done a very ordinary thing, as if she had casually thrown away a piece of trash. Would anyone feel proud or show off after throwing away a piece of trash? No, everyone felt that it was very ordinary. At this moment, no trace of Snow felt that in Wei Wei Bai's eyes, he was just a piece of trash that was casually thrown away. After throwing it away, it would not even leave a ripple in her heart. His incomparable belief in her love was suddenly shaken. "Wei Wei Bai, are you doing this to make me hate you?" Hating her was not emotional. It was equivalent to letting him live. This thought made him not feel the slightest bit of sadness even when facing her sword. Wei Wei Bai smiled. "If you think so, then so be it. Anyway, I'm happy for you to be so optimistic before you die." After saying that, the tip of the sword pierced and pulled open. The meridians in both of his hands were broken, the kind of wound that had no chance of recovery. Blood gushed out and dyed his white robe and the ends of his silver hair red. He looked at her with a fiery and complicated gaze, as if he could not understand, but also as if he was shaken. Wei Wei Bai nimbly avoided his blood and accidentally stained her skirt a little. She frowned and reached out to brush it away, as if she was brushing away dust. However, the bloodstains were stained, and even if it came in contact with water, it would not fade easily. She said with some regret, "I really like this dress, but I can't wear it like this." Then, she weighed the sword in her hand. "It's all Master's fault. Why did he make this sword so heavy?" No trace of Snow's voice was a little hoarse. "If I knew you were going to take it, I would have made a lighter sword so that your hand wouldn't be sore." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she finally revealed a smile. "Master, you really love me. You love me so much that I'm silly and cute. In the past, my mother said that if a man likes a woman, no matter how smart he is, he will become a fool. I didn't believe it, but when I saw you, I realized that it was true." As she spoke, she cut off the meridians in his feet with some difficulty. Both his hands and feet were crippled. No trace of Snow knew that there was no possibility of recovery with such a degree of rupture of the meridians. She really wanted to cripple him. There was no room for negotiation. More than half of his body was soaked in blood. His eyes were extremely dark, like a bottomless abyss, but there was a gentleness that could not be removed from his face. On a man's body, there was actually an icy cold refinement and a tender fragility at the same time. Wei Wei Bai was not moved at all. She threw away the sword and complained, "It's so heavy." She was still delicate and willful. Her temperament was still cold and vicious. No trace of Snow's heart slowly sank. The color on his face turned pale as the blood drained away. He could not find a trace of liking for him in her expression. He used to like playing games. When he was the most excited, he saw the appearance of those people falling into hell. But once those people really fell, he would not be interested and would start to slack and be lazy, even disdainful and impatient. Quick, quick, / quick, quick, quick. Chapter 1349. And Wei Wei Bai's current appearance was very similar to how he used to look after picking the fruit of the game. It was exactly the same. He had completely fallen in love with her. To her, this love game was over. She even somewhat disliked his existence now. Because she had already successfully captured him, she viewed him as useless trash. No trace of snow moved his lips. His eyes were filled with many emotions, but in the end, he was still unwilling to believe it. He was more willing to believe that she was treating him so cruelly just to keep him alive. No trace of snow suddenly raised his powerless hand. Blood flowed down his wrist. It was exceptionally tragic. His fingers barely managed to pinch her skirt. His face that was as pale as paper had a calm and strange expression. It was as if he was just puzzled. For me, you would rather cut off your own wrist. Could it be that you would do this for a game? Wei Wei Bai raised her hand. Her wrist was still wrapped in bandages. She frowned and said, "Originally, I didn't want to do this, but when you used the sword to kill me, it completely aroused my competitive spirit. To be able to obtain your love by cutting off one of my hands is an exceptionally enjoyable process for me." The harder his love was, the more she gave, the more she felt that this love game was very challenging. Moreover, at my age, I can't learn martial arts. Cutting off the meridians in one of my hands is not a big loss. Compared to no trace of snow, the price of her hand was the same as the price of his 4 limbs being crippled. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. No trace of snow's eyes trembled. He slowly closed his eyes. His breathing was heavy and painful. She did not know that the reason he helped her expand her meridians was to give her all of his internal energy. That was why she felt that her hand was not important at all. It was not important to the point that she could use it to exchange for her love and trust. No trace of snow was practically on the verge of death. He still refused to believe that all of this was just a trap. When you jumped off the cliff with me, was it also for the game? His trust in her was built up from the crazy actions she had taken time and time again to get close to him without regard for her life. When Wei Wei Bai heard his words, she couldn't help but laugh. "Because I trust you, you definitely won't die. Your martial arts are so high. You can catch me if I jump down. How can I die?" She firmly believed that he would not die. His kung fu allowed them to return to the cliff. Her method of deceiving people was not perfect, nor was it the most exquisite. However, he was the most stubborn and the most unscrupulous. Wei Wei Bai slowly squatted down, avoiding his blood. She stretched out her clean and beautiful fingers and touched his face. She said softly, "Master, do you know what that stove is for?" No trace of snow looked at her without moving his eyes. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Arousal, the extreme arousal, actually made the drug she made with her blood ineffective. His chest was in so much pain that it felt like it was going to split open. Wei Wei Bai didn't care and said, "The drug is ineffective? How pitiful. You have to suffer this kind of torture when you're aroused. Although I was quite happy when I saw you acting up. It was fun after all." She actually felt that the pain of his arousal was very fun. No trace of snow finally couldn't hold it in and spat out a mouthful of blood. The pain in his eyes finally appeared. His fingers could barely hold onto her skirt. His face was mottled with blood. His brows were fierce and mournful, like a beast that had been forced to a dead end. But his voice became softer. "Wei Wei / crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Com download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Com. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.